The fireplace burned intensely in the room. The bed creaked. The sheet barely concealed the man's muscular body. The girl trembled, sometimes moaned, and then covered her face with her palm, but the man asked her not to hide. He looked at her with authority and interest, smoothing his short blonde hair. From behind, the young man looked like a massive muscle, with the glow of the flames playing on his back and shoulders. Outside the window, it was a quiet night. The stars were almost invisible behind the clouds. A blonde man in a robe stood in front of the window and looked at the bed. The blue-eyed girl turned over in bed and rubbed her sleepy face a little. The man was glad he waited for her to wake up, because now he wants to hear the answer to his question. The girl got lost in memories upon realizing she had been too lucky lately. The villagers were energized upon learning that the provincial lord would visit them. As yesterday, the heroine again had a lot of work to do, for example, watching the shop. It seems that if she works hard, she will be able to have a good life. That is why she was happy to move to this place where it is cold all year round. Suddenly, among the crowd, she saw Aunt Helda with her 3 children, whom she immediately recognized as Finn and Luca, and the children greeted their mother. This day was supposed to be one of many, when suddenly the people in the square started running. A commotion started. One of the neighbors dropped firewood. The girl saw a horse that was already too close. Suddenly, the animal went crazy and reared right over the small children. The crowd pulled Aunt Gelda in the other direction, so the mother had to cover them with herself. It seems this was the moment everything went wrong. A man in armor suddenly appeared near the girl, stabbing the horse with a sword. He was a tall, blonde young man. His face looked aristocratic, even when stained with blood. The girl bowed to thank him for saving them, and also said she would return his kindness. The man smiled. He did not consider the death of his beloved horse to be a kindness. So he ordered the stranger to bring the children's father to pay for the horse. The girl replied that she had no husband, so payment would be made later. But the Lord believed a woman could not do this. However, when the girl seriously said she was ready for anything, the young man got an idea. He invited her to come to Boulder Castle that night. When the girl with the children and her aunt were home, a fight broke out between them. The dark-haired woman cried and tried to persuade the girl not to go. But she stood firm. The heroine was heading to Geneva, that is, on the border of the Ringan Empire, so she had to get there by carriage. Her path led through the castle of the Marquis of Moringheights, grandson of the brave Red Lion, who was the founding hero of the Ringan Empire. A descendant of this great man is called the Lion's Renaissance for his military merits. The butler informed the lord that the widow was ready, bowed, and left. Then, in front of the marquis stood a slender girl with long curly locks. Her blue eyes were devoid of emotion. However, her body trembled, but the widow felt cold, so the lord covered her with a fur coat up to her shoulder. Marquis Moringheights himself was dressed in a half-closed tunic, the deep neckline of which revealed a strong torso. He was surprised by the courage of his guest. She was willing to jump on her horse and promised to do anything for him. Great maternal love is truly amazing. The girl confidently replied that she would make that promise to anyone, regardless of their origin. The lord stared at her. He was slightly hurt by the word addressed to anyone. For some time, they stood silently facing each other, locking their interlocutor in a cold gaze. The silence was broken by a man. He reminded her that the guest should know what to do when entering a man's room in such attire. He even suggested she leave if she was scared, but the girl resolutely took off the fur coat. And then the couple lay down on the bed. Thus, the Marquis of Moringheights stands before the widow again in a robe, waiting for her to wake up. He is concerned with the question of how he ended up being the first man the girl spent the night with. The lord leaned closer and traced his finger over the widow's lips, then asked if he really needed to take her again to get an answer. After that, the young man wrapped his large palm around the girl's slender neck. He pressed harder and harder when suddenly she asked him to stop and pushed him on the chest. The guest covered herself with a sheet, took a deep breath, and assured the Marquis that she was not lying. Moringheights drew his own conclusions, but they were wrong. The girl clutched the sheet and said that the children were not born to her, but she still considers them her sons. So the Lord should have moved away and gotten off her. The Marquis moved away from the bed, scratched the back of his neck, and asked who, then, was the real mother of those children. The girl explained that her brother's wife was their mother. She died right after giving birth to Rudia, the youngest one. The brother sailed on the merchant ship Puisin before the birth of his youngest son. Since then, it has been impossible to contact him. There is not even information on whether he is alive. The eldest is barely 5 years old, the second only 3, and they are too young to understand the death of their parents because they believe the heroine is their mother. The Lord was surprised that his guest was posing as a widow, even though she herself was still innocent. He looked at his guest and thought that she would have to work because she didn't even know if her brother was alive. So it was easier to pretend to be a widow than a single girl. In any case, the Marquis heard everything he wanted, so it was time to return to the subject. And he once again grasped the fragile body of his guest. He leaned over the girl and wrapped his arm around her shoulders and neck, and then began to bite the soft skin, recalling in a whisper that Baltimore Heights himself had taken her. Morning came. The sun shone on the bed where the long-haired girl lay. The Marquis was dressing, and the guest stared at the wall, waiting for him to leave. However, when he addressed her by her name, Claire, she stood up. She apologized for disturbing her master's rest and asked permission to leave immediately. She didn't look in his direction when he said that the guest and her family should remain in the Voloder Castle until the snow melts on Mount Altas next year. The Marquis decided that this was the price the girl had to pay for the heroine's heart. He sank down, realizing this wouldn't end in one night. Morn Heights left the room and reasoned that paying with her body for the death of his beloved horse was a fair enough price for Geneva. He was also captivated by the rebellion that Claire carefully hides under the guise of her mission. He only experienced such pleasure on the battlefield, so he couldn't believe he felt this in the bed of a simple widow. It was even absurd. Outside, towards beautiful sunny weather, Finn and Luca were playing and having fun. At that moment, Aunt Yelda was busy with housework and was angry with Claire. The girl decided it was time to remove the heating pad from her stomach. But her aunt immediately stopped the attempt. The woman was very worried about Claire, because at night there was such a big bear with her. And the girl herself seemed calm, and even believed that living in the castle would be better than here. Moreover, she doesn't even remember her mother's voice, so only thanks to her aunt does she know how to be a good mother. Yelda was touched, but Claire's next vulgar sentence irritated her again and... Meanwhile, someone knocked on the door. The girl got up to open the door and was very surprised to see the general of the Tibetan knighthood as a guest. Julian Crum, by order of the Marquis of Morn Heights, arrived to escort Lady Claire to the castle. And immediately murmurs started among the crowd. Then the girl was riding in a carriage and staring out the window emotionlessly. She was just trying to convince herself that everything would be fine. The children were happy to go on a trip and move in general, but Aunt Gelda cursed and asked them not to run. Claire narrowed her eyes and looked at the majestic castle bathed in sunlight. At that moment, the Marquis was sitting in his office with documents and a special guest. Schweiven put his hand to his heart and severely greeted his master. He came because he heard that the Marquis had taken a woman to the heir's tower. Schweiven reminded the master that after the death of his mother, Lady Oberda, this place had no owner. Perhaps in this case, it would be better to find someone for this position first. But the Marquis explained that few women could meet the Count's requirements. And besides, the Emperor works day and night to get an heir. But Schweiven was sure that he was not the only one who wanted the master to become the ruler of this empire. About 20 years ago, when the first emperor died, the political arena was divided into 3 factions. The capital is Halpin, where Emperor Kilbarich resides, and the Duchy of Puisin is ruled by his brother, Archduke Edwin. In addition to the Marquisate of Geneva, ruled by Reinhend's friend, Neuburg-Mohrenheitz. According to Schweiven, the current emperor and archduke are not capable of ruling the empire. They even dismissed their younger sister because they felt she was a threat. In the princess's absence, The only heirs of Ringen's blood are the emperor, the archduke, and the archduke's only daughter, Lady Brody. Apparently, the empire is on the verge of collapse, so you can no longer trust Kilberridge. And Edwin. Count Schwaben wanted to continue his fiery speech, but the Marquis stopped him. The guest apologized, explaining that very little time remained before the Lord left for Pisen. So he, as a faithful servant, showed him patience. In any case, we must not forget that the Archduke will definitely try to arrange an engagement for the Marquis with Lady Brody this time. But when Mornheitz saw the carriage with the widow arriving, he immediately dismissed the Count. The family was housed in a new, spacious house. Claire was happy and jokingly said that the children would no longer catch colds. The general of the knighthood explained that the girl's family would live here, and that the lady herself would go to the tower. He also reported that the Marquis was already waiting, which surprised her aunt. But Claire calmed her down. She also ordered Finn and Luke to wash up and go to bed before their mother returned. And if anyone stays up late, they have to eat 2 bowls of spinach soup. Claire was a little annoyed, because the tower was quite far from the annex to escape. It would be more difficult than she thought. The door creaked open, and the girl entered a large dark room. The Marquis was already waiting for her here. He stood silently in his fur coat. There was a sword nearby, so the atmosphere around the Lord was still frightening. There are certainly rumors surrounding Mornheitz, and many people call him the best swordsman in the Empire. However, for a man who made his name in battles, he is quite handsome. Although he also has a creepy side. He approached the girl, and she thanked him for the new home, and the Marquis took her hand. He wrapped his arm around her waist and looked directly into her eyes. Claire once again thanked the master for the security he provided, because he sent the Teutonic Order of Knights after her, warning everyone not to touch her. And thanks to the Marquis, she and the children can now be in the safest place in Geneva. This brought a smile to Mornheitz's face, and he threw the girl onto the bed. Now Claire's debt has become larger, so she will have to work hard to pay it off. But the girl was embarrassed and blushing. She ran her hand over his thigh and rested her face against the soft skin, awaiting the deserved payment. Morning came, and while sleeping, Claire enjoyed the softness of the bed. Suddenly, the same thought scared her. She jumped up and realized how much her body ached. On the other hand, this is not surprising. The Marquis continued yesterday until he lost consciousness. A knock was heard on the door, and a dark-haired young man named Jake entered the room. He is the butler of the Voloder Castle. As long as Claire stays in the tower, she can turn to him if she needs anything. The girl asked if her work started today. For example, she could start sewing and tanning leather immediately without training. She also intends to work hard at any task. However, she is useless in the kitchen, so she will be grateful if she is assigned laundry. The butler explained to the guest that as long as she served the master, no one would allow her to do such hard work. Claire smiled at this phrase. What she had been doing for the last 2 days could hardly be called serving the master. Jake also said that the lady could go for a walk, but she was not allowed to invite anyone to the tower. The girl was surprised by this attitude, so she decided to behave like a hostess, sending the butler to rest. The door clicked shut. The servant disappeared, and Claire collapsed on the bed, sighing deeply. It had been too long since she had her own bed. On the other hand, she seems to have earned that luxury by enduring such a rude man. It is a fair trade. Although she still feels uncomfortable. Claire remembered her brother and how he called her cold-blooded. It seemed to be true. In any case, since such a happy opportunity has arisen, it is necessary to take full advantage of it. And sleep well at night, and then spend time with the children. Jake left the tower onto the street and was surprised by the Marquis's behavior. Because yesterday, he went to the village on business with supplies and returned covered in blood. The Knights of the Order then spoke with admiration of the beautiful widow who boldly threw herself under the horse. Red-haired Max wouldn't stop talking and irritated the Marquis with empty chatter. So the Lord ordered his friend to shut up and bring him that woman. At first, the knight didn't even understand what he was talking about, while Bolt ordered that upon the guest's arrival, Jake should escort her to the Marquis's room. As a result, Bolt not only brought the woman to the castle, but also settled her in the heir's tower. And there is also something extraordinary about this woman. Despite the situation, she is too calm and, although a commoner, she is surprisingly elegant. Jake even thought it was time for a change in the Marquis's life, but from that day on he never visited the tower. And at that moment, Claire was asking for work at the castle. She explained that it seemed the Lord had forgotten about her anyway, and that she needed to settle the debt with the Marquis because she hadn't done anything for 10 days. Claire explained that in bed, she was paying for the lives of her children, and since he no longer visited her, it was time to pay in another way. The people of Geneva believe that all debts must be paid. The Marquis is now helping her family and may kick them out before the family arrives. Jake tried to persuade the girl to stop until Max stopped him. He started joking again, while Lord Bolt himself sat on his horse next to her. A gloomy and serious knight sat on a horse, paying no attention to those around him. Jake asked the Marquis why they were wearing armor, but received an answer from Max, who explained that the guards had seen a bear in the mountain. Claire looked at the blonde man's profile and realized that he was deliberately ignoring her. Max kept laughing and asked Jake what kind of woman was with him, but Bolt immediately kicked the horse and rushed forward. Claire ran after him, shouting and begging him to stop because she needed to say something. Jake grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her toward him so the horse wouldn't run her over. And Max noticed that the situation seemed painfully familiar to him. And then he remembered that this was the same widow, only now she looked much tidier. Morn Heights turned to the girl and, looking at her with contempt, ordered her to return to the tower. The girl replied that she would return only if she was allowed to work in the castle. The Marquis, once again, coldly ordered her to return, and Claire continued arguing. Then the Lord turned to the butler and ordered him to teach the ignorant woman what would happen if orders were disobeyed. And if Bolt sees the widow out of place again, Jake will lose his arm. After that, the Marquis rushed forward, and Max went to catch up with him. Jake wasn't too scared, but Claire hated this bastard. Later, the girl was rocking Rudia at the tea table, and the aunt was interested in the handsome butler and in the permission to work. Unfortunately, Jake cannot do anything without the Marquis, and the songs of praise in honor of the Lord turned out to be empty. Gilda was ruthless in her hatred of the nobles, so Claire had to be reminded that the children were nearby. The aunt did not stop and warned that disobedience to the Marquis could lead to consequences. Claire was in a good mood and joked about stocking up on a couple of silver plates so she could sell them if something happened. Gilda continued swearing, and the girl again asked her to calm down for Rudia's sake. Meanwhile, on the mountain there was a battle with the bear with the thickest fur. He didn't care about the sword. They tried to strangle him with ropes, when suddenly more angry bears appeared nearby. At that moment, Lord Marquis Mornhates arrived at the scene. With a slight movement of his hand, he dealt with the terrible animals. Now he needs to call many people to transport the corpses before sunset. Covered in blood, Bold exhaled heavily, put away his sword, and asked Max to sort everything out here. Lately the knight has been disappearing after every hunt. Perhaps the case is that the blood stained the famous sword Ascaron. The Marquis's horse grazed peacefully near his clothes. Mornhates himself was knee-deep in the river. It seems that here he could truly rest, washing his face with clean, cold water. Perhaps he is better suited to staying on the border, on the battlefield, than following in his father's footsteps and ruling. The thirst for blood is eternal. At this rate, Bolt feels he will simply go mad. And to quench his thirst, he must take part in a battle on the battlefield or somewhere else. The Marquis suddenly remembered how Jake grabbed Claire's hand when she tried to run after the horse. The Lord smiled, thinking of Claire. She had only been alone for a couple of days and was already showing how much she missed a man in her bed. Well, since she desperately wants to be in bed with the Marquis again, he will visit her once more. In any case, it costs him nothing to embrace a woman who means nothing to him. While the children were playing in the yard, Rudia had lunch, with Claire being helped by Aunt Gelda. The girl just had the opportunity to relieve the eternally tired woman. And what's more, the servants allowed her to participate in milking the cows this morning. Helda replied that this opportunity only arose thanks to the details about the lady's life. The peasants' questions ranged from the death of a husband to gaining and losing a marquis's favor. Despite the foul language, Claire was glad that there were people here who were kind to Finn and Luca, and that they could play with children their age. The aunt indignantly asked why the girl disappeared immediately after heading to the tower, if she cared so much about the children. Moreover, Gelda was interested in how her niece spent her days there. Claire thought about it and replied that she does practically nothing. She only dusts everywhere. She lights the fireplaces on every floor every day. She ventilates the room and shakes out the blankets. Now she is exploring the floors, so she managed to find a huge library. The aunt was immediately indignant because it turned out that Claire had been busy all this time. Today the girl plans to climb to the very top of the tower, and Yelda only rejoiced in her thoughts that her niece was really doing well. Then the aunt got distracted thinking about the poor girl who had to grow up quickly and live in the usual hardships. In any case, Yelda understood that Claire would remain a baby to her. Evening approached, and the girl said goodbye to her hospitable aunt and returned to the tower. Yelda tried to persuade her to stay, because the Marquis never returned after that day. But Claire did not want to give him reason to reproach her. Besides, she saw him today. So maybe this meeting will remind him to visit his guest tonight. Claire walked to the tower and thought about her position, because of which the people in the castle do not speak to her. A woman serving her master. A woman who gave her body to a powerful man, but she doesn't care about this gossip. Claire and her family will leave this place with the start of spring in any case. You just need to hold out until that moment. These are the thoughts that occupied the girl's head until she saw something beautiful. The orange sun gently disappears behind the snowy mountains. I wonder what this beauty will look like from the top of the tower. This question made the girl run faster upstairs. For some reason, it reminds her of a moment from a book she loved when she was young. How a man with golden white hair and a red-haired girl met under the same sunset sky. As she climbed the stairs, she remembered her favorite moment from the book. The whole world's sky turned red, and when the golden disk disappeared on the horizon, the two lovers swore that not even death would separate them. Claire was surprised to find the Marquis himself on the roof of the tower. He had really come to admire the sunset. He calmly turned his gaze to her, while Claire's threat to cut off Jake's hand flashed through her mind. Bolt was the first to start the conversation, noting that the widow was quite fast. And he bowed, saying that he did not expect to find the master there. The Marquis made another caustic remark as Claire looked at his dazzling beauty against the red sky. So much so that she wanted to look away. At the same time, he is incredibly arrogant, even now, when he talks about not walking unnecessarily around the castle. This man was the cause of all of Claire's misfortunes, and she was forced to make excuses for him again, reminding him that she only wanted to pay the debt. And if the Marquis no longer wanted her, then she could do it in another way. Then the Lord addressed the widow by her name and told her she must wait. She looked at him with piercing blue eyes and asked how long she could wait. After all, he simply imprisoned her, made her family a laughingstock, and gave no guarantees. But the Marquis was cold and inflexible. The girl is only asked to wait until he desires her, and then Claire asks him what she should do if she desires him herself, not wanting to become a woman who could simply be taken advantage of. She put on an innocent face and repeated her question, which so surprised the Lord. Bolt remained silent for some time, his mouth slightly open in astonishment. Then he composed himself, smiled, and asked if Claire really needed a man to warm her bed. And why is the firewood burning in the fireplace no longer enough to keep warm? The girl insisted that it wasn't the cold, but that she had nothing to do and that there were 4 people in her family she had to support. For her part, Claire understood that the Marquis protected them only until next year. They needed to prepare for life after having to leave this place. And rest in this case was an unaffordable luxury. Therefore, she asks the Lord for mercy and allows her and her aunt to work in the castle. Moreover, the girl needs to prepare for the day when the Marquis will seek to meet her. so that she and the children can live independently. The word itself greatly surprised the lord, and the girl reminded him that she would be penniless when she left the castle. Mornheit smiled. It is really possible that if he does not visit the widow every night, she will have to be busy with work. Claire replied that even if he visited her, she still needed work. At that moment, the lord drew the embarrassed lady towards him with a single movement, embracing her by the waist and looked deep into her eyes. He touched the warm skin of her shoulder with his lips and asked if it wasn't easier to get what she wanted by pleasing him than by working. Bolt kissed Claire's neck, but she asked him to stop and then pushed him away completely. She licked her lips and asked if her mother really didn't tell her what to do if she wanted to get something from a man. She turned away and replied that she had not heard such a thing from her mother, as she left the world immediately after her daughter's birth. The Marquis then ascertained for himself that this girl not only takes care of her brother's 3 children and her aunt, but also grew up without knowing her own mother's face. He ran his finger over Claire's damp lips and said that if she wanted something, she just needed to call him to her bed. And then he pressed his lips against hers. In the dark room, the creaking of a wooden bed and women's moans were heard. Claire had tears in her eyes and in a choked voice asked the lord to slow down. He grabbed her wrist tightly and reminded her that there had been other words before. And requests. Bold frowned. He brought the girl's thigh closer, and the room filled with new moans and the Marquis's back filled with new scratches. Later, as Claire adjusted her breathing, Mornhates thought that this woman smelled of the wind blowing from the Alta's mountains. And this refreshing scent replaced the smell of blood. He knew the widow hadn't run to the top to see him, but still, the lord was not disappointed. Bolt wanted to punish her for ignoring the warning to stay in one place. But her presence was enough to calm the irritation. The first night he spent with her wasn't so bad, and when he lay down alone afterwards, the Marquis was surprised to feel a slight tremor. Despite this, he did not return to her, perhaps because he did not understand the reason why he gifted her this tower in just one night. But it seems as if this woman does not know her situation. She is worried about her future even after spending the night with the Marquis, even if he no longer visited her. She would be compensated accordingly. It is unclear whether this is naivety regarding the world order or if she is trying to trick the lord. Bolt looked again at Claire's red and wet face and tucked her hair behind her ear. He had no feelings, not even for the noble people. Why then would he want to keep this uprooted person close to him? Claire clearly continued to bother him and to distract himself from strange thoughts. He kissed the girl again. Morning came, and as the sun played with Claire's curls spread over the bed, Bolt buttoned his shirt. At the exit from the room, the butler was already waiting for him with morning greetings. He came to escort the lord to the office, and as Bolt walked through the corridors of the tower, he realized that Claire seemed to have touched every corner of the place. The Marquis's last memories of this tower were filled with the smell of blood. And now everything has changed. These words scared Jake. It really is time to forbid the lady from cleaning here. Bolt calmly replied that it was her choice, and that it was time to give work to the woman's aunt. The Marquis was completely calm and noted that the night had gone well, so it was possible to make some concessions. Jake was surprised by the lord's behavior, as he never heard any requests, no matter how much they begged him. It is really possible that this time the Marquis is really changing. There were several pieces of jewelry with precious stones on the table in front of the Marquis, but Bolt did not want to look at them. Jake would have liked not to bother the lord, but unfortunately, he could not do that. The lord had to choose a gift for the Archduke. The butler decided to help the knight in his choice, showing off a precious, sparkling bracelet. Something quite extraordinary, the Archduke would like it. Bolt didn't care at all, so regardless of the jewel, he agreed. But he also had to choose a gift for Lady Brodie. Without looking up from reading the book, the Marquis suggested simply choosing a horse. Jake felt embarrassed and asked if Lady Brodie really needed a horse. And Bolt confirmed his words, only the animal must be obedient and playful. The butler was surprised that the knight was going to send a horse, instead of jewelry, to the only princess of the empire. However, Bolt also ordered all the other jewels to be packed. And donated too, as long as he never saw them again. But then the Marquis's gaze fell upon a beautiful necklace with blue crystals that he asked to leave on the table. Jake wondered if he had misheard, because the Lord only glanced at the decoration. All this seemed strange to the butler, since the master ordered the girl's aunt's family to find work. Something unusual has been happening to the Marquis lately. Jake looked out the window and wondered if this necklace could have anything to do with the lady in that tower. Meanwhile, on the other side of the window, the tower guest herself with a candle in her hands was climbing the stairs. She wondered how quickly they had found a job for her aunt, whether it was due to her conviction, or if the Marquis had planned everything this way. On the other hand, Claire has not yet been given the opportunity to do anything. But the Lord acknowledged that her presence here was useful, and that is a good thing. The Marquis also doesn't seem likely to go back on his word, so you can take a break. The girl entered the library on the 3rd floor, comfortably flooded with candlelight. She placed the lamp on the table and chose a book after she started ventilating. The pages no longer smelled musty. Claire decided to spend the rest of the afternoon reading a history book. The founder of the Ringan Empire was Nicholas Ringan. Together with his friend Newburgh, he achieved many victories on the battlefield and performed many great deeds. He united the continent of Western Roman into one empire and then fell in love with a mysterious woman and made her his empress. He was the favorite of the empire's people until the last day of his life. At that moment, bold Mornhades and Julian Crome, dressed in armor, were walking through the forest. The Marquis stopped and looked towards the tower window, in which a light was burning. And the knight was surprised that the knight was looking there again. Bold smiled and noted the excessive scrutiny of the general of the knighthood. Julian explained that it was his duty, and moreover, he wanted to accompany the knight to Puisin. The general had his own scores to settle with a man he wanted to tear to pieces. And this very man lives healthy in Langtow Castle, right in Puisin. But the Lord reminded him that the same could be agreed upon with the Archduke. Those knights who followed Ringan the Great were knights of the Teutonic Order. Every member of this order despises the current emperor and Archduke. Julian was surprised that such an idea had occurred to the Marquis. The Marquis explained that the parade was dangerous now, but not as dangerous as the fact that knights appeared there who wanted to devour the Archduke alive. The general said there were rumors that the Lord was carrying all sorts of jewelry to propose marriage to Puisin. Julian, of course, considers the Marquis a wise man, but still the Archduke is a vile man. And cunning. This cunning man will do whatever it takes to have his daughter adopt the Mornhates cake. But the Marquis once again coldly addressed the general by his name to stop him. This engagement will never happen, so there is no point in bothering the Lord with this matter. The men had been standing near the tower door for some time. So Bolt jokingly asked if Julian was going to air with him. Of course, this was unnecessary, so the general said goodbye and then thought that the Marquis was not the type of person to fall for the Archduke's traps. But the knight had never shown interest in women, not even on the battlefield. And now he became interested in the girl in that tower. It is a good idea to have intimacy with this girl before Iria Puisin, or he will just add more fuel to the fire of his desires. The Marquis climbed to the 3rd floor of the tower and looked through the crack in the half-open door of the library. Bolt thought that he came here out of curiosity, but it seems she really knows how to read. Which is unexpected. The Lord entered the room silently. The girl's recent words spoken from the top of the tower were spinning in his head. It seems that he then realized the emotions he really felt for Claire. When he saw her, he felt dissatisfied, because she is the most revered person in this empire. But when he is with her, he feels like he is interfering with someone noble and respectable. The Marquis felt as if he had turned into a beggar or a drunkard. This thought made him smile. He was like a bastard who was drunk, but couldn't stop drinking strong alcohol. He took the girl's hand and turned her to press her face against his, and then coldly ordered her to undress. But Claire tried to push him away, and the Lord was aroused by her purity and nobility. He bit her finger. Looking at her embarrassed face and crystalline blue eyes, Bolt wondered why he felt guilty before. The Lord's gaze expressed lust mixed with tenderness. He said that such a disheveled look suits Claire very well. Her eyes look like gems. I wonder what she would look like if she wore that necklace over her fine light skin and stood in the blue water of the spring. His imagination painted beautiful pictures. The Marquis even felt annoyed that he already felt satisfaction. Morin Hates quickly got rid of his armor and stood half-naked, the shelves trembling from his pressure. The girl loudly asked him to stop, but the man got too carried away by her breasts at some point. The books on the shelf simply started raining down. Bolt lifted the girl in his arms, and she only asked him to stop, because books were falling everywhere. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. She was in pain, but the Marquis was not going to stop, so he took the girl's face in his palm and kissed her passionately on the lips. This action ended with the arrival of the butler, who was surprised why the Lord needed medicine in the middle of the night. Claire sat up and trembled, while Bolt explained that a falling book had injured her ankle. Jake examined the girl's leg and said the bone was damaged, so it was better not to walk anywhere for a while. In fact, the servant was very worried that the Marquis was injured. So he needed medicine so urgently, but the truth didn't seem to make it any easier. Moreover, the servant was not entirely clear why Claire was visiting this library. This tower was built specifically for Bolt, and mainly this library contains historical books and complex theological ones. A large number of books must be written in Frankish, a language used by most nobles, or in languages like Latin and Swedish. Jake has no idea why this girl is in a library like this. Bolt looked menacingly at the servant and ordered him to leave if he was done. And Claire desperately wanted to be left alone now. When Jake left the room, Bolt turned to the widow and called her a stupid woman. After all, if she was in so much pain, she should have bitten him to make him stop. Claire calmly replied that she would not allow this to be done. Then the Marquis approached the girl and asked if he really needed to explain to her where to bite a man for him to pay attention to her words. She looked at this huge man and thought that he didn't move when all these books fell on him. Why resist then? The pain grew stronger. Claire began to tremble. It was impossible to bear. Her head was swimming. She could barely utter the words. She apologized for not being able to serve the master today. And then she collapsed helplessly in his arms. Bolt tried to talk to her. But the girl only dreamed that this bastard would leave her alone. Claire was trembling, delirious, and feverish. Drops of sweat ran down her face. She had a fever. When she was little, a demon visited her every night. He urged her to close her eyes and think of nothing, only how her heart squeezes like tender bread. And then the parents, whom the girl misses so much, will be hers. Little Claire sat alone in a cold room, and no one came to see her. She prayed desperately for the sun to come out and stop the demon's whispers. And now it's happening again. The voice of the dark entity asked what the girl could do. Even if she survived, there was no point in resisting. One just had to give up life. What Claire wanted most now was for the demon to leave her alone. Bolt stroked the girl's wet head, convincing her in a calm voice that everything would be fine. While sleeping, she felt his warm hand. The Marquis looked at Claire's red face, her body burned, and from time to time, loud gasps of choking breath were heard in the room. He lifted her fragile body and noticed that the girl was sweating. His gaze filled with sympathy for the helpless lady. Lord recalled how Claire said she couldn't serve him in this condition. He had met many women who said ridiculous things, and this girl was just as annoying. Thoughts spun in my head how it all started. The brave and respected Marquis Morn Heights made a mistake because he couldn't contain it within himself. War is a primitive thing, so without hesitation he showed his true self. And when he returned to the castle, he could not accept the peaceful life that unfolded over time. It became more and more boring. Perhaps that is why, once his bloodthirsty nature was awakened, the Lord lost control and ended up unleashing his disgusting lust. He even came up with the excuse that this was the norm, as the widow is a low-class girl. She was still leaning in his arms and breathing heavily. Why did she show such cheek if she had asked for forgiveness? He would have shown mercy like a marquis. Bolt got out of bed and thought Claire looked strange enduring this pain. But he wasn't upset. He took a glass of water from the nightstand, thinking he should be kinder to this girl. The marquis took some water into his mouth and passed it to Claire through a kiss. A few drops spilled, but she swallowed. He touched her wet lips and laid her back on the bed, but the girl's hand grabbed him by the shoulder. Claire murmured that she was cold, so the Lord lay down beside her, hugged her, and told her she would feel better soon. In Puisin, at Langtow Castle, Archduke Edwin wondered when the Margraviate people planned to leave. The servant explained they were running to Langtow, so everything would be known soon. There was no reason to get excited. Edwin got angry and shouted at the butler, because he had been hearing the same words for several days. The Archduke observed that the Marquis was as cheeky as his father. It bothered him that if he had a son, he wouldn't have to humble himself like this. Everyone else gives birth to sons easily, but for some reason, he and his brother have so much trouble. The daughter causes more difficulties, having to go through all the obstacles to marry Martella's precious son. The servant pointed out that if His Highness accepts Newburgh's grandson as a son-in-law, he will rule not only this empire, but also in Esbjergen and other neighboring kingdoms. Edwin thought this problem could have been avoided if Bolt had not been given such an important title. His father was kind to everyone during his life, except his children and their mother. Now the Archduke is interested in knowing if Bolt is really dating a girl. According to rumors, the Marquis took an ordinary widow, so there should be no problems with Brodie's marriage. As long as they can have a child, Edwin is confident that Brodie will be able to seduce Bolt herself. After all, his daughter is known as the greatest beauty of the empire. Raindrops were hitting the walls of the heir's tower. The sky was gloomy and dark. The smell of rain-soaked wood is so refreshing that Claire so wanted to enjoy this air a little longer. But suddenly the gray-haired woman called her. The girl was still not allowed out into the cold. It was Mrs. Rabia. She was appointed by the Marquis to take care of the widow. And the old woman indeed did so. A couple of days ago, Claire had a conversation with the Marquis. He gave the butler a deadline of 2 weeks so the lady could walk again. He accepted no reservations or objections, so Jake could only agree. Although it was difficult to imagine how such an injury could heal in less than a month. Moreover, it would be difficult for Lady Claire to be alone during this time. So the Lord ordered Mrs. Rabia to be called. It turns out she was the Marquis's nanny in childhood. She always complained and was surprised that the Lord called such an elderly nanny. And also that the girl serving the Lord was such a baby. The nanny fed Claire in bed and even tried to help her bathe. Thanks to her, the widow began to live like a noble lady. But unfortunately, she also had to listen to reproaches about her thinness. The persistence of the old woman reminded Claire of Aunt Helda, which is why she probably didn't feel any annoyance. Yes, Claire hadn't seen her aunt for a long time, so she decided to ask if Mrs. Rabia had seen the children when she passed by there. The nanny complained again and cursed the girl for her impatience, because she should have eaten first. But Claire had never been separated from her children for so long. Thoughtfully, the girl swallowed the soup and suddenly realized that it was very similar to what Aunt Gelda was preparing. And Mrs. Rabia confirmed her conjectures because she went with her aunt and took this gift. The nanny also noted the aunt's good skills in cooking, sewing, and laundry. It is not clear how such a thin person managed to work until now. Out of impatience, Claire shouted a question about the children, and Mrs. Rabia said they were fine too. Apparently, Finn goes to the mountain to fetch firewood with the other children, and the cook rewards him with a cake. Claire's face lit up with a smile. But the nanny's question, about why she pretended to be the mother of other people's children, hit her like a blow to the head. Her hands sweated, her cheeks were flushed. How could Mrs. Rabia know this? Although according to the butler, this woman was the only person in the past who could give orders to the Marquis. The old woman works for the Marquis and probably reports everything Claire tells her. Morn Heights not only locked her in this prison without bars, but also assigned someone to watch her. Perhaps the Marquis is more obsessed with the widow than he initially thought. At that moment, Bolt himself was sitting in his office in the presence of his entourage. And he reported that the puissant merchant ship was attacked again by pirates. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and ordered someone to be secretly sent to the Jurassic Sea. Surely, the person leading the pirates must be quite capable, so you will have to find out how their powers work. The Lord approached the window and thought that such a leader had appeared so suddenly. One of the advisors heard that the Marquis was even going to exclude the Teutonic Knights from the campaign, and that then the only assistant would be his second son, Max, which causes concern. Even a lion would find it difficult to survive in a cave full of poisonous snakes. Geneva's only weakness is that most of its vassals are knights. Although a university is being built to solve this problem, the situation is unstable because Baron Keenitz, responsible for the project, is not well. If the Baron falls, his younger brother Jake will have to take care of everything so that he is not sent to spy on the pirates. I wonder what the Marquis is thinking about, who has been silently staring at the tower through the window for a long time. At that moment, Claire was walking silently down the tower corridor, holding onto the wall. And she was amused by the idea that she could still hear Mrs. Rabia cursing. Claire's story about her brother greatly impressed the nanny, who began to sympathize more with the widow and, in order to see her aunt, the girl needs Mrs. Rabia's understanding. Claire looked out the window and thought that the Marquis hadn't visited her since that night. For some reason, the girl's memories of that day become clearer over time. Although she hasn't felt such pain for a long time, it disappeared at some point during the night. Claire realized that the Marquis had been comforting her all night with his warm hands. Then she experienced something unknown until that moment. This feeling was almost enough to relieve the pain in her leg. The widow doesn't even want to feel offended by him for his cruelty that night. And in fact, she is disappointed that the Marquis stopped coming to her. You don't need to recover, the pain must be affecting you, it should disappear soon. Claire climbed the stone slabs of the stairs with difficulty. These steps were very hard to climb. But still, she couldn't leave the books, especially when she felt as confused as she was now. It's incredible that she had such feelings for the man who injured her ankle. When suddenly, a hand appeared out of nowhere. It pulled Claire towards it, and the girl found herself in Mornheight's arms. The widow was surprised, and the man noticed that she had gained weight. These words impressed her even more after several days of absence. So they met in a comfortable and bright room towards which Claire was heading. She looked fascinated at the clean and tidy library. Everything was shining. Bolt surprised the girl even more when he handed her a history book she had read before. He really remembered that. The lady opened the book, and the Marquis suddenly asked who had taught her to read. So Claire realized that the Lord had not helped her get here out of the goodness of his heart. I had to tell you that I learned to read on my own. When she was a child, Claire cleaned the library of someone she served, and naturally, the writing became familiar to her. But Bolt was not naturally stupid. He didn't believe that a simple maid would learn Latin just by visiting the library. And he wondered if this girl was arrogant or stupid. She climbed the stairs, despite her ankle injury, just to read a history book. Then Claire's tone changed, and she started talking about her imprisonment. Her mother died after her daughter's birth. The girl herself was abandoned in the old library, and after living there alone for several years, she learned to read. Then the Marquis asked Claire why her mother had died. The girl replied that the woman was trying to escape the man who was threatening her. He was the son of the master she served, so she threw herself into the Cryan River. Bolt was surprised to hear this tragic story. But what surprised him the most was that the girl did not shed a single tear and remained extremely calm. Her soul must have become numb to these endless misfortunes, just as his was numb to death after so many battlefields. During the conversation, it turned out that Claire knew how to read not only Latin, but also Frankish and Swedish. Then Bolt said he could recommend something. Because if you ask Rabia for books, she will treat the widow like a plague. The Marquis handed the book to the girl. And noticing the confusion, he thought she wasn't a fan of theology books. But he was only surprised that the Lord allowed her to read it. And the scribes are quite strange too. So books are considered more valuable than jewels. Most likely these books are worth unimaginable sums. Bolt also asked about the relationship between Claire and Mrs. Rabia. The girl, of course, replied that she gets along well with the nanny. And then, the widow decided to say that she disliked that they had actually sent the old woman to watch her. The Marquis was surprised by this conclusion, because he would follow a woman with a broken leg out of fear that she would run away. In any case, she was already his. If she slept with him to pay her debt, why would he waste time on surveillance? Even if Claire escaped, he would have to make a decision. Kill her with one blow or tear her to pieces. A tremor ran through the girl's body. She blushed and turned away. And the Marquis sat on the edge of the table as if nothing had happened. He even joked about his love for gray hair when he saw an illustration in an open book. The Marquis got carried away by the condemnation of this book and declared that everything was wrong. And Claire's eyes filled with childish curiosity. She really wanted to know if Emperor Ringan really had light golden hair. And thinking that the Lord saw the Emperor with his own eyes, the girl completely melted. Bolt replied that it was indeed so, but that he did not remember the great ruler. But his portrait hangs in the hallway. And seeing Claire's interest, he grabbed her by the waist and suggested that she beg him to see the portrait in person. Let her say she will do anything and then he will take her there, let her burn. And get what she wants. After all, it's easier to read in Latin, and he kissed her passionately. It was a sunny day. Deer were grazing at the edge of the forest, when suddenly an arrow flew almost silently into the side of the animal. The knights admired the Marquis's eagle eye. Julian said that Jacques had found an excellent white horse as a gift for the Archduke, and that one of the young men was willing to train the mare. Bolt joked about teaching him how to leave a cowgirl. Julian is still obsessed with the AIR. To Lanthe Castle. This, of course, makes sense, since the Archduke is the main enemy of the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights, as a mercenary campaign, began to serve the first emperor upon receiving the order. And in those days, the emperor's only condition was the obligation to serve only the direct heirs of the family. And all for the purpose of protecting the concubine's fetus. Be that as it may, after the emperor's death, Kilbarich took the throne from his newborn sister and made his mother empress, demanding obedience from the knights of the Teutonic Order. The Teutonic Knights refused to serve him and left the palace, which led the current ruling family to declare them traitors and bring them to heel. After the Archduke poisoned the Order's general, a war almost broke out. But the wise father Martel Mornhates hired the knights into his service, and the conflict was temporarily silenced. Bolt knows exactly what Julian will do to the Archduke. So why even think about taking the knights with him or not? Here Max released the horses, reporting that Baron Kinnett seemed to have passed away 2 days ago. A messenger from Saltz had just arrived who was heading to meet Jake. Another arrow hit the stained victim. Bolt looked at Julian and said that everything here stays with him. On the way, it turned out that the Baron fell off his horse because he was hiding his illness. Bolt had no idea that Max was so attached to the deceased Kinnets. But he justified himself by saying that now he was the only newcomer without a title. And that, moreover, the presence of this family in Geneva is certainly important. Although perhaps the master will return Baron Kinnets to Salz. Or there is the option of keeping him with you, as Sir Martel did. But all this talk irritated Bolt. A delegation was already standing near the castle gates, and Max, seeing his father, decided to leave quickly in another direction. The servant greeted the master and asked if the Marquis had heard about the terrible tragedy. Salz and Boldor now need Jake, and there are still not enough scribes. All this is very untimely. Bold first asked where Jake was now. They told him that the butler was in the heir's tower, which saddened the Marquis. Meanwhile, Jake sat at the widow's feet and bandaged her ankle. She said that her leg didn't hurt if she didn't step on it, and addressed her doctor with the title of Baron. He replied indifferently that there was no inheritance document, so he was still the chief butler. So there was no point in worrying. But the girl still felt uncomfortable, and moreover, Jake would probably move to Saltz. But the butler replied that after his brother's funeral, he would return here. because this job corresponded to his destiny. This life was predetermined for him from the moment he was born as the second son of the Knits family. Jake said he wouldn't have to use the splint anymore, but Claire was more interested in what he was going to do next. This sudden question made the newly appointed Baron nervous. The widow repeated the question whether Jake would be free to choose without the Marquis's permission. He would want to stay in Voloder. The butler left and pondered this strange thought. Making a decision without the Marquis's permission had never occurred to him. His family had served the Mornheit for generations. His brother would become the next Baron Kunitz, and he himself was the head butler. That is what they were raised for. This has always been perceived as a decree of fate from which one cannot escape. Although in his youth Jake found it difficult to accept the predestination of his fate. After serving the Marquis for some time, he stopped thinking about it. This question of what he was going to do, haunted Kunitz. Making a choice without the Marquis's permission. It's even funny. Jake knocked on the door and entered the Lord's office, who said he had just spoken with Count Suvin about him. He conveyed his condolences to the butler, and Bolt asked if the Baron had found an owner for his lands. But Jake replied that he would do it after his brother's funeral. He assured the Marquis that he had nothing to worry about. Kunitz Jr. would make sure that this situation would not affect the campaign towards Langthew. The Count pointed out that he had requested 30 scribes from the monastery. This number should be enough to prepare books for the university. Bolt got up from the table, placed his hand on Baron Kunitz's shoulder, and wished him good luck on his trip to Saul's. While Jake thought that he would always follow the Marquis anyway. Later in the library, Mornheit sat next to Claire, who was reading. And they looked at each other. The girl decided to ask if the butler would stay in Voloder. This question amused Bolt. And he took the book away from the widow. She was indignant and said it was Mrs. Rabia's question. She wanted to understand the Marquis's wishes. The Lord replied that the decision did not depend on him, but on Jake, and if the Marquis does not like this decision, he himself will not allow it. Claire wondered if Bolt would stand firm even if Jake begged him. The Marquis thought for a moment, and then a smile appeared on his face. He took a lock of the girl's hair and told her that maybe she should try to take pity on him. She turned away, and the Lord sarcastically remarked that she simply didn't have enough talent. Not even willpower, but that it was worth trying at least for his care. Claire remembered that the Marquis carried her to the library every night. So the nanny stopped treating her like she had the plague. Then the girl said she would pay everything when she recovered a little. A little annoyed, she confirmed that she would work twice as hard once her leg was fully recovered. These words surprised the Marquis. He looked closely at Claire. She said she would serve the Lord when and where he wanted, as long as he waited for her leg to recover. Bolt reproached her for the inappropriateness of such words, but the girl felt even more embarrassed because she said it all out of desperation. This interested the Marquis. He lifted Claire's chin and looked into her eyes to find out what she wanted so much to hang herself with jewels. Claire pushed his large hand away and replied that she only wanted to see her family, but the Marquis was already sick of talking about this damned family. It's really not enough that she, standing, sees children who, by the way, aren't even hers. He was annoyed by the woman's stupidity, but Claire insisted. If he allows her to leave the tower, she will see the children and return soon. The Marquis said he wasn't stopping her anyway. But Claire asked for a horse and a carriage. Bolt smiled. This was already too cheeky. So if the widow was so desperate, she could crawl there. And if not, then she really didn't want to. Claire was very stubborn, so she decided to follow the Marquis's advice. She got on all fours and crawled toward the exit. Bolt, naturally, did not count on such a trick, so he immediately lifted her off the floor and sat her on the table. He was overwhelmed with rage. It is really impossible to choose a simpler option than doing something so crazy. Why is she acting so stupid? But the girl objected. Because she can't even move on her own. What else should she do? The Marquis smiled and reminded her that he was still there, and that if she tried hard enough, he would let go of the carriage. She looked at him with determination and asked him to take her as before. This was not enough for the Lord. He wanted Claire to make him shine, to make him want to create for her. And if she doesn't, even after her death, he will never let her go. They kissed passionately. Claire sometimes had to catch her breath. Paul hugged her and couldn't enjoy it to the end. It wasn't enough for him. He threw her onto the table and got rid of her clothes, even if one day he would break her heart. Then, after a while, Claire was visiting her aunt and was having the girl's hair done. The widow was worried about having to finish quickly before the children woke up. But Gelda didn't want to rush. Moreover, she kept insulting that pervert who came up with the idea of breaking the poor girl's leg. Claire was worried that her aunt's screams would wake the children, but they slept soundly. Like groundhogs. And the woman was also interested in knowing if this damned marquis had assigned a carriage to Claire. The girl looked away and, embarrassed, replied that when she woke up, the carriage was already parked near the tower. The thought crossed my mind that maybe this was due to a successful night. Strange thoughts swirled in her head. She wrung her hair with a towel and turned to her aunt. Claire seems to like the marquis. Aunt Gelda was not surprised at all. Throughout her childhood, she called the girl the most beautiful girl in the world. The aunt is very kind, which is why she said such things to her thin niece, whom she found in the basement. Although she was disappointed to have left traces of her parents in that place, hand in hand with Aunt Gelda. Claire walked out of that hell. The girl turned to her aunt and asked if she really looked like her mother. Gilda confirmed that her niece was just a copy of her sister, a striking resemblance. And above all, Claire's mother dissolved after meeting her father. The aunt patted the girl's head and asked her not to forget that she was the most precious treasure in the old woman's life. Moreover, Gilda is sure that Claire will be even more beautiful than her mother. But the widow herself thought that she could not shine like that, because most likely she would be absorbed by the marquis. In the Lord's office, Count Schwaben asked if it was worth starting to sign trade agreements with neighboring duchies. But all of Bolt's thoughts were absorbed in the view from the window. He looked at the tower and thought that Claire should have returned by now. Her name echoed in his mind. He had been embarrassed to say it out loud before. But now his heart leaps out of his chest every time he says it. The marquis did not expect her to become anything more than just a girl in a tower. And now he enjoys her inexperienced body and even rewards it. How absurd. The Count remembered his presence and offered to negotiate peace in the south. But even here the Lord's thoughts were focused on her, because Claire catches a cold so often that it would be good to take her to the south. The Marquis had already said it out loud, so S.H. Weven had to ask again in the negotiations. They agreed on the condition that Geneva use the port this winter. The conversation ended. The Count said goodbye and thought that the Marquis had somehow changed. Later, Count Schwaben went to the training ground to visit his son. He knew that Max would be able to answer the question of what kind of woman lives in that tower. The knight was indignant that his father, having a single son, was interested in what Bolt had in his pants. But the Count reminded him that Max himself had chosen this path. The young man didn't understand if his father was so interested in that woman and the Marquis's attitude towards her. Why not ask the knight himself? The Count reflected that he himself was making observations at first. The Lord didn't seem interested. But lately, he visited her frequently. Therefore, Schwaben ordered his son to watch this woman and the Marquis. Max doubted the necessity of this event because this relationship wouldn't last long. But his father thought the opposite. He saw that something had already changed. The Marquis's gaze stopped several times at the tower. And this had never happened before. The Count had already forgot about the existence of this woman when she managed to influence the Lord so much. It is necessary to carefully monitor whether she will help the Marquis or harm him. In the third floor of the tower, the fireplace burned. Claire and Bolt were sitting on the sofa reading. The Marquis looked at the girl and decided to ask why she was in such a good mood. She replied that the children were a little rounder, and they continued reading. And the Lord was annoyed that she was talking about these brats again. He was concerned that the widow herself looked thin and wasn't trying to disguise herself at all. Apparently, she didn't want to thank him. But I must admit that her rosy face was pleasant to look at. Bold approached the girl and kissed her. The book in her hands trembled, and her cheeks flushed even more. He noticed that Claire's hair smelled of grass. She was really rolling around in the forest with a sore leg. He also asked if the widow needed anything else, because it was time to ask. Because he planned to take her away now. Claire said they had just taken off her splint, so she asked him to be careful with her leg. The Marquis covered the girl's body, with kisses, and silent moans were heard in the room. Bolt got rid of his shirt, noticing that there was a very strange smell on Claire's skin. They kissed for a long time, when suddenly the girl heard someone call her name. She stood up, pushing the Marquis's giant body away from her. Her voice sounded very much like Aunt Helda's. They knocked on the door. It was Dylan, a knight of the Teutonic Order. He apologized, but still reported that there was a woman standing in the yard, because the older child seemed to have disappeared into the forest. Beside herself with horror, Claire tried to approach the knight and find out the details. But her legs gave out, and she fell to the floor. The Marquis didn't like the unnecessary noise. He started lifting the girl, but she desperately wanted to see her aunt. He explained to her that she wouldn't achieve anything by doing this, but that Claire was going on a search. The Marquis asked not to anger him if the girl didn't want to be tied up, but she begged him. The widow believed that Finn was lost because of her. She left and he went to look for her. She had to stay with them, and now she could only beg and plead with the Marquis. After all, he likes to see her beg. Claire started to slip out of the Marquis's hands, and the latter, indignant, threw her onto the sofa. Then the lord took the handkerchief and tightly tied the widow's hands, because his previous words were not an empty threat. Claire screamed and asked to be let go, because now was not the time to do all this. But the decisions here were made by the Marquis. She tried to break free, writhed desperately, and shouted insults after Bolt left. Morn Hates at the door looked at her and ordered her to be a good girl if she wanted at least a chance to get her son's body back. The door closed, and Claire thought that the damned bastard was just a demon. She screamed, but no one heard her. Tears welled up in her eyes. The girl asked Jenna, the children's mother, for forgiveness for asking her to look after them. That day, Claire made a promise to keep these children safe, even if it meant risking her life. She cannot lose her family again, a worry similar to the helpless anticipation of death when she was a child. But now she has someone to protect. If something happens to Finn, Claire promises to stick a knife in the Marquis's heart. Near the tower door, knights were restraining a woman who, striving, asked to see her niece. Bolt watched what was happening from the window. Dylan noticed that he did not expect this woman to cross the thorny hedge. She crossed the field of thorns from the house here. However, the Marquis is not surprised that this is Aunt Claire. Bull stepped forward and asked the knight about the details of the child's disappearance. He was definitely not there at dawn. Most likely, he went to look for his mother at night. Now people are inspecting the territory. The last trace of the child was found where the wolf pack was often seen. So an action plan is needed from the master. In fact, people were walking through the forest with torches, calling Finn at the top of their lungs. They whispered among themselves, because they didn't even know if the boy would be alive or if several hours had already passed. Several decades ago, Bolt spent a long time in the tower and to prevent strangers from passing through. His grandfather enclosed it with thorny bushes, the exit from which lies through the mountains. Or the valley. The mountains are too steep for a 5-year-old child to climb. So the Marquis ordered them to move to the valley. If the child had reached here, he would most likely be tired and frightened by the cries of wild animals, and by instinct he would want to hide. Bolt pushed aside the fir branches and saw a small boy whispering the word Mom. The Marquis looked at the bundle and remembered how Claire talked about the children's plumpness. Yelda was still being held by the knights while trying to go look for Finn. When suddenly, the Marquis made a caustic joke about inherited character traits. The woman saw a burly man holding a baby. The Marquis handed the child over to his aunt, who hugged him tightly. Then Bolt ordered that the woman and child be escorted home and called a doctor. The Marquis turned to Dylan and asked why he had arranged all this. There should be no noise created in the tower without the Lord's permission. The knight bowed and apologized. The situation seemed serious enough so he rushed without thinking. Mornhates granted the Teutonic Knights their freedom in exchange for unconditional loyalty. However, if they had gone out to search even a little later, perhaps the result would have been different. Bolt asked to take care of these things himself from now on, and Dylan already understood that he would have trouble with the captain. But if the woman who looks towards the village every day, having lost her son, would have broken into pieces, and if it weren't for the Marquis, the child would not have survived. Bold returned to the tower, and the sight he found there pleasantly surprised him. Claire was sitting silently, tied to the bed, but as soon as he entered, she urgently asked to be untied. There were red marks on the girl's hand from an attempt to escape the Marquis. He was annoyed that she couldn't stay still for a couple of hours. Claire begged the Marquis to answer if everything was all right with her son. Her recklessness irritated the Lord. As the owner of the land, it is his responsibility to ensure the child's safety. But she continues to provoke his barbaric side. So he replied that the child had been eaten by wolves, so it was time to stop trembling. The Marquis approached the surprised girl and continued to say cruel things to her. They spend every night together, so Claire needs another child to look after him. But this sentence was not completed. After the words, "Shut your mouth," a red mark from the slap appeared on the Marquis's face. Claire was in labor because she realized what she had done. The Lord's gaze was icy. The girl took the hand with which she committed the biggest mistake and awaited the end. Rather, she feared not for her life, but for the life of her family. Claire experienced the greatest fear and horror. She tried to utter a word, but stuttered. For the Marquis, this fear was ironic, because this woman is the only one who despises him. Bolt left the room and told the servant that he was returning to the main castle. That there was no need to prepare the horse, he wanted to walk. Mornhates killed a person for the first time when he was only 13 years old. After the death of a Sphyrgian Empire assassin who had infiltrated the tower, Bolt realized that he too was a murderer who enjoyed watching the blood. After the incident, the father sent the child to the battlefield earlier than planned to alleviate his brutal instincts. He has also worked hard to teach his son to control himself, but it seems that Bolt is now on the verge of the abyss. The Marquis ordered that the tower be vacated tomorrow, and that the woman be taken care of so that she would not appear before his sight. Time passed, work on the river was in full swing, maids washed the laundry. Naturally, they gossiped today, talking about the Marquis packing his bags yesterday. Not because he went on a trip. It is unclear whether he was accompanied by a knighthood order, but it seems the Lord suddenly left for a hunt. Perhaps this move was made to annoy the Archduke, because right now he is impatiently awaiting the Marquis. He wouldn't want the Lord to become the Archduke's son-in-law. However, it is true that there is no suitable noble lady for the master right now. And in general, the Marquis is not particularly looking for encounters with women. He only accepted that woman in the tower. But then the tower's former guest herself walked past the gossips, and the girls fell silent. They knew that Claire had been expelled, and they also noticed her young age for motherhood. Someone thought that the widow would last a long time yet, since she was gifted a tower. But apparently, the Marquis didn't like her slim figure. Claire didn't listen to empty talk. She thought that several days had passed since that night, the Lord had gone to work. And the girl had started working. The Marquis still supports her family, but she has to live with servants and quickly got used to the sideways glances. While the master is away, the head maid ordered the cleaning of the third floor of the castle. All maids have a marked area to work. Claire took charge of cleaning the corridors of the corners. Some people even feel sorry for her after hearing what happened to her. So kindly, with a bad leg, mopping the floors is the optimal job. Now that the daily workload has arrived, Claire has no time to worry. Finn had returned safely, which was all she needed, and it wasn't until she met Aunt Yelda that she knew who really saved the boy. It is unclear why the Marquis said those words to the widow. And if he is a great warrior of the Empire, why did he let himself be hit? After that slap, Claire thought she would die immediately. She must have looked pathetic at that moment. But now it doesn't matter, because she will never see this person again. She realized she was lost in thought again, so she began to convince herself that everything was for the better. And she also diligently scrubbed the floor until she found an impressive painting on the wall. Claire froze in amazement. She knew exactly who the blonde man in the portrait was. Suddenly, another man was next to the girl, only this one was already real. It was Count Schwaben, and Claire immediately realized that, since this noble could move easily around the castle, it meant he was part of the marquise' inner circle. He was interested in what the maid was doing here, because maids were forbidden from entering here. And the girl bowed, apologizing. The Count also noticed the bandage on Claire's leg and asked her to be careful. And she had already gathered the courage to ask a disturbing question. Her gaze focused on the painting, and Claire asked if the portrait depicted Emperor Ringen himself. It was true, the blonde young man in the fur coat is the first ruler of the empire. Claire now realized that he looked different here than in the drawing she had seen in the book. In general, this is logical, because no one will bother to write books intended for commoners. The Count wondered what kind of book the maid was referring to, and when she heard the title The History of the Rochman Continent, he was quite surprised. Moreover, Claire even allowed herself to talk about the fate of the overthrowers and their moral qualities, because they usually described the emperor as an ordinary boyfriend. The maid seemed very strange to the Count, especially when she ran away so as not to continue the topic of reading. The former Marquis Lord Newburgh liked to say that Emperor Ringen wanted to create a world where even commoners could read. Yes, it was a dream, but time passed next to Martel. He left this world, and the imperial family was plunged into corruption. So, as long as Count Schwaben lives in this world, he is simply obliged to make Bolt the next emperor. He is willing to make any sacrifice in the name of this dream, just like Martel. Bolt has always been special, so the Count believes that the Marquis will be a great ruler. Schwaben suddenly remembered how his little godson Bolt had also been indignant as a child, because the emperor had been turned into a mere boyfriend. When night fell and all the maids went to sleep in their shared beds, Claire still couldn't sleep. She quietly left the room with a dragging step. Silence fell in the ownerless castle. The girl sat on the stairs and decided to take a nap here. To be honest, on days like this, she missed the time spent in the tower, how she could read books in the library at night. This is so stupid. Claire dreamed so much about a family, because she couldn't imagine what it would be like to live completely alone. And now she misses the quiet life in the tower. Suddenly the door creaked. The girl saw the Marquis returning home. She bowed and apologized, murmuring something about the servants. But he walked past, completely ignoring the widow. Apparently, the Lord really lost interest in her. It is unclear why his heart is so grieved then. A new day dawned, and when the Marquis and the knightly order returned from the house, the work increased notably. Deer, bears, even wild oxen, the hides are endless, and everything must be washed before it spoils. Claire was even happy to finally have something to do, because when she met him after so long, the first thing she felt was fear. On the one hand, she feared greatly for her life, and now the maid can only labor to forget. On the other hand, there was also that strange feeling, but no. My heart was probably about to jump out of my chest, just from wounded pride. Suddenly, an angry Aunt Yelda appeared out of nowhere. She was not happy that Claire was here again. The aunt asked not to go anywhere today. The girl's fragile body could not withstand processing hides for so many days in a row. The woman took the scarf off her niece's head and continued swearing that she simply looked terrible. The aunt took Claire to the river so she could finally wash and put on clean clothes. The girl was a little reluctant, but still sat on a large log and began to ask about the children. It turned out the children were already playing somewhere, and Mrs. Rabia was taking care of Rudia. Yelda helped her niece wash, and Claire wondered if Mrs. Rabia was having trouble visiting the estate. After all, could terrible things happen if the Marquis found out about this? The aunt indeed remained thoughtful. The nanny had been summoned to the palace, but the Marquis had not yet indicated the time when it would be time for her to leave. Egilda was sure that not even the most insensitive man would dare to intimidate the nanny, who raised him from the cradle. The girl remained in a nightgown and submerged herself in the water. The last trace left by the marquise disappeared. She felt completely clean. Aunt likes Claire's eye color very much. It reminds her of her sister's eyes, but the girl hates it because this blue color only brought trouble. By the way, they also had to flee Puisin because of these eyes. A wicked knight constantly teased her about the blue color, and one day Din, quite tired of it, beat him until he bled. Then they had to flee the knights and hide in Geneva. Perhaps she was also in the marquisate because of her eyes. I remembered again the moment of their first meeting, when she promised to do whatever he wanted. Throughout her life, Claire has suffered much harassment from many oppressive men. How could she be so reckless? And yet, she secretly kept hoping that the marquis, recognized as the unsurpassed warrior of the empire, would be different from other nobles. And Diane said that margraves were the only heroes left in the empire. Due to her brother's constant exaggerations, expectations were higher than the tallest mountains. But perhaps she shouldn't constantly blame others. Now she would also get rid of the strange feeling that visited her last night. The aunt was worried about her niece's well-being and suddenly asked if she still considered her the most beautiful girl. Helda placed her hand on the girl's face and said she was charming, the most dazzling girl in the world. A smile appeared on Claire's face. She knelt at her aunt's feet and asked her to repeat these wonderful words. The marquis watched what was happening from the bushes, looking at the girl with regret. Max was also with him, with his always cheerful attitude. He asked why Bolt had stopped suddenly. And then he himself saw how the maids were having fun in the water and made a couple of dirty jokes. The Lord ordered the knight in a cold tone to close his eyes until allowed to open them again. At that moment, the Archduke was tearing and throwing bottles against the wall, and shouting at his servants. He was indignant that, although accompanied by a naval fleet, the pirates managed to besiege his ships. The frightened sailors suggested that the Archduke ask the Marquis for help, because he was almost Edwin's son-in-law. But the Archduke began to turn this idea over. That is, to accuse the Marquis in general of failing his duties to protect the borders. So Edwin urgently wanted to see Bolt in Langt. The next night, Claire walked happily down the castle corridor, holding a bucket and a rag in her hands. The head maid was worried the day before because the third floor hadn't been cleaned, and the girl volunteered to do it. Thanks to this job, the widow could contemplate the portrait again. Her blue eyes filled with admiration when she saw the emperor again. But Claire was not the only one admiring the painting behind her. A descendant of the man in the portrait was peeking from behind the curtain. He was happy to find a widow in this place. At first, he thought his peace was disturbed by a rat running past. Then he began to think about how to punish this unfortunate maiden. At that moment, Claire stood in front of the portrait, spellbound, and even blushed a little with shame. Bolt had no idea that this woman could smile so radiantly as expected. She liked men like the emperor. That's why she can't even take her eyes off him. She doesn't even notice that the Marquis is right behind her. Emperor Ringen's face particularly infuriated Lord Hoy. Claire reached out to the portrait to touch it, but realized in time that she could not touch such a thing. This amused the Lord, who received a slap from her. Bolt decided that the maid had been standing in front of the painting for too long. So he approached her and grabbed her by the shoulder, suggesting she step back a few paces to see the painting better. Claire did not expect to see the Marquis now, so fear shone in her eyes again. To tell the truth, it was more unexpected to see her here and not the owner of the castle. Love in Heights was irritated by the admiration with which the girl looked at the man in the portrait, even though she couldn't even look at him. In fact, Bolt planned to visit Puisin after returning from a hunt. If he hadn't looked again at those eyes that shine brighter than the starry sky, he would have already crossed the border towards Geneva. Claire wears rags and works with other maids, but still attracts the attention of the Marquis, who always looks with his eyes only at this woman among the crowd. The widow explained that she only came here to clean and did not want to look suspicious. Bolt sarcastically noticed that he hadn't seen her with a rag in her hands. Claire apologized for interrupting the night's rest and promised to leave immediately. But he reminded her that she wasn't the one making the decisions. His words hurt the girl greatly. She felt even more useless, but the Marquis asked her to raise her head, inviting her to a place from where the portrait could be seen better. Bolt touched her and told her she should enjoy the portrait in its entirety, since she had come, and also asked about her ankle. The Marquis was absolutely calm, and Claire was absolutely disarmed. She replied that the ankle had fully recovered and didn't hurt anymore. Bolt also noticed the girl's thinness, although he thought she would receive the necessary help. After all, it was for this reason that he sent Ravilla to the estate. Surely, at least the children's cheeks got rounder. Claire thought the Marquis had forgotten her existence, so her soul began to stir again. Timidly, she took him by the sleeve and thanked him. With complete sincerity, she thanked him for saving Finn. Bolt turned slightly embarrassed and replied that he wasn't saving anyone, but was simply passing by. But Claire again said in a soft and calm voice that she wanted to thank the knight. And the girl, blushing with shame, asked for forgiveness. The Marquis fell silent, so the widow decided to clarify that she meant a slap. She timidly continued by saying that she was very angry, but still regretted what happened. Besides, she didn't know that Bolt saved Finn. The Lord decided to clarify if she had told people that she had hit the Lord. Although anyway nobody would have believed her, the Marquis asked to erase this episode from memory, as he did. Claire was still worried about this situation, so she decided to clarify that she too had been shown an injustice. The Marquis was surprised by the woman's behavior, as she usually answered his questions with monosyllables, and avoided eye contact. She continued babbling that if she had known he saved Finn, she would never have done it. Bolt approached the widow and noticed that she was apologizing as if she wanted to be forgiven, and returned to the tower. He whispered his name in her ear and bit the lady's warm neck. Claire pushed the Lord away and was indignant. This was not her wish, and that she expected when starting such a conversation with this arrogant man. The girl turned around and walked away. She began to mop the floor demonstratively, as the Marquis did not understand at all what she meant. The maid was scrubbing the floor, but at the same time realized that she shouldn't behave like this in such a situation. You have to kneel before him and thank him like you've never thanked anyone. How a woman imprisoned in a tower should behave. But Claire is not like that. She cannot do that. She continued frantically washing the floor as the Marquis approached the girl. Tension was building. The maid tried to distract herself, but couldn't. It seems the Marquis knew about her feelings even before she confessed everything to him. The man approached her, took her hand, and told her out loud that she was being stupid, and that if she had something to say, she should say it directly, looking him in the eyes. Claire stood up and nervously thanked the Marquis once again for saving Finn, and apologized. But this does not mean at all that she wants to return to the tower and roll around in the hay with the master. The girl's heart sank. She understood that she was born with a terrible character, so if she had to die because of it, so be it. Anger reached its limit, and Claire was already shouting that such a life was not better than being born an animal. And for the Marquis, this was the last straw. He threw the woman to the floor and leaned over her, pressing his thigh against him. The Lord invited her to look at the real beast, and the maid understood that the Lord always behaves this way when something doesn't go according to his plan. Previously, if she found herself in such a situation, she would have been scared, but now the girl pulled the Marquis towards her and kissed him passionately. She was determined not to give in to the Marquis's temptations anymore. The Lord really enjoyed this game. He didn't mind. Finally, she could feel like a real animal, so he grabbed the woman's pink thigh with his teeth. The man's clothes quickly left his body, and he was already caressing Claire's breasts with his lips. She moaned and pulled him closer, pressing against his muscular body. The girl ran her finger over the lips of Bolt's enthusiastic face, after which he attacked the girl with renewed vigor. Morning arrived, the sun shone brightly illuminating the third-floor corridor, and the rustle of a dress was heard around the corner. The head maid couldn't believe what she saw and trembled with fear, when suddenly, the owner of the castle found her. In his arms, he held a sleeping girl covered with a sheet. He handed the widow over to the head maid and asked her to take care of her. And while the woman was babbling about Claire, the Marquis asked her to tell the butler that they would leave for Langtau 2 days before morning. There was noise and commotion in the courtyard, and in the castle, maids ran around with different boxes. The corridors were being cleaned, knights were preparing to go on a campaign. Lord Kinitz walked down the red carpet, everyone rejoiced just to see him back. Especially the Marquis, who was preparing for a trip. Jake entered the master's office and apologized for being away too long. But the Baron was finally able to delegate his responsibilities for maintaining the lands and the university's business. The confidant is an experienced and extremely altruistic man. He excelled in architecture. And he also actively participated in the reconstruction of the Saul's monastery. And this trusted representative sent a request to send a large number of Voloder employees to the monastery. After all, unfortunately half of the scribes already sent are suffering from food poisoning. So Bolt gave the go-ahead to send new people and said he was taking that woman with him. Jake was surprised if the knight was talking about Claire and if he really wanted to take her on an excursion. Under the castle windows, a maid was working, whom the lord planned to take to the festival in Langthew. The Marquis smiled and asked the butler to include Claire in the official list without her knowing. The Baron didn't even imagine how this could be achieved, but he couldn't argue with the knight. Jake was even more confused about what the Marquis was actually doing. All the maids were working hard at that moment, carrying heavy loads. Not all columns can handle this. However, as a large holiday approaches, it is not surprising that the Lord is taking so many things with him. Claire saw how the maids suffered and tried to help them, but the head maid stopped her, giving the others time to rest too. The tired girls rushed to the kitchen for a snack, leaving only Madame and Claire in the courtyard. However, the widow did not seem happy about the break. Madame commented that everyone knew Claire was different from the other maids. These words provoked a malicious smile on the girl's face, because all maids wear the same ragged clothes. They do the same work and eat the same food. Madame saw Claire's attention and panicked, making the excuse that the widow only had reasons to tire her out more. Like what happened last night. The girl thanked the head cleaner for her help, because she herself couldn't even wash. Claire was very embarrassed by that incident, but the women were very kind. They took the girl's hand and told her there was nothing to thank her for. It is very difficult to raise children alone. These words surprised Claire. Madame explained that her husband was taken to the front. He was killed during the war. So she had to raise her daughter alone, but she left this world due to the spread of the epidemic. Therefore, the woman perfectly understands how difficult it is to raise children alone. And besides, a widow doesn't have many options. The girl was surprised, because it was the first time someone other than Aunt Gelda had told her something like that. Moreover, Madame condemns the Marquis for his cruelty, and for satisfying his needs so dirtily. Claire was very embarrassed by the conversation with such revelations, so she said she needed to get some fresh air. And escaped. It seemed to her that she was going crazy, because last night she pressed her naked body against the Marquis. And she moaned brazenly, and today she not only thinks about it, but desires it again. The girl was scared by these thoughts, so she wanted to escape this terrible place as soon as possible. She will be herself again when she gets out of this cage, and when the Marquis leaves for the festival. She will not meet him again. Immersed in thoughts about a bright future, where feelings would recede. Claire didn't notice Lord Kinitz approaching. He came to convey a message from the Marquis. A knight wants a lady to accompany him to a festival in Langthew. Claire cursed. She was surprised and very angry. She felt that this man had completely lost his mind. She burst into Jake's office and started cleaning the table with a rag. This outburst surprised him, but the girl explained that she rarely caught the maid without a rag. Lord Kinitz couldn't understand anything and tried to explain to Claire that she didn't need to do this. After all, the procession will set off soon. The ladies must prepare. The girl was angry and sarcastic. She tried to find out exactly what he needed to collect, if the Marquis really wanted to introduce her to other nobles. Jake tried to calm her down, and the widow realized that she seemed to be venting her anger for no reason. She regrets that it is Kinitsu who has to listen to this, because he is the only man who calls her by her name. He also adds lady and treats her with at least a little respect. The Baron himself was still trying to explain that he was specifically sent to prepare the lady. Claire said she visited the Lord's bedroom too often not to look suspicious, which greatly embarrassed the butler. He continued joking about how she should have appeared in knight's armor, when suddenly Count Schwenin burst into the office shouting. Was he indignant that more than 10 employees were sent to Salts? After all, this means that in Boldor, there will not be enough employees to write reports and letters. Jake justified himself by saying that these people are really needed in Salts, and that nothing can be done about it. The Count is still indignant. Tomorrow is a big holiday, and there are no people in the castle who can write important official letters. Also this damned Max, who still doesn't know how to learn Latin. Claire quickly realized that this man is Aaron Schwiven. He is the head of the second most influential family in Geneva after the Mohrenheits. And his son Max is the captain of the knightly order. He is so powerful that he even managed to become the son-in-law of the previous marquise. The Count was very interested, but Jake tried to intervene, warning that Lady Claire should not get involved in these matters. He was ready for the festival and that there was nothing to worry about, but S.H. Waven didn't like the quality of these employees. Having no strength to endure these discussions with excuses, Claire decided to intervene and asked if they were looking for a person who could translate from Latin to Frankish. The Count looked closely at the girl and recognized her as a maiden with a wounded leg. The girl was surprised. The widow explained that she knew how to read Latin. She also knows how to write in Latin and translate to Frankish. Perhaps this is how she can help. Eschuven heard the girl's name and asked who she was, to which Lord Kunitz introduced the widow as a 2-room apartment from the tower. The Count was surprised to learn that this was the Marquise lady. This complicates the process of obtaining written help. Now Claire understood that the butler was only pretending to respect her, but in reality, he was the same conservative worm as everyone else here. But she was determined and offered to dispel all doubts by testing her skills. Jake tried to be indignant, but the Count was very interested. The girl began to translate from Frankish to Latin, noticing that, judging by the elegant handwriting, the decision was written by the Marquis himself. The Count was surprised to see that the girl was reading a book about the history of Rochman. He thought the maid was exaggerating her skills, but the grammar, the translation, and even the handwriting were impressive. She could compete with the best scribe on the continent. But if it turns out that a commoner has excelled in literature, and even Latin, most nobles will consider her a witch or a victim of the plague. She should have listened to Aunt Yelda and kept silent about my skills, because the question of where Claire learned this arose again. She again made the excuse that she simply read a lot when she was a child, and was surprised that the Count was not angry about the fact that the woman was talented. In any case, the translation was impressive, so Schweben approached the girl and proposed that she become an employee. Jake appealed to prudence, because if people found out, Boulder would lose all authority. But the Count valued talented people more. The girl dreamed of being an employee instead of the lady of the tower. On the day of departure to Langto, a blue-eyed girl walked among priests in black robes. The Marquis walked in armor and on horseback. People rejoiced at just one look at the Lord. It seems the Count was worried about the Marquis's upcoming meeting with the Archduke. But this event promises great benefits, so he will have to endure it. The empire is in decline. The next emperor after Ringen has left this world, and the nobles are taking everything they can into their hands while the poor become poorer every day. Discontent is growing, and doubts about the legitimate rule of the imperial family are intensifying. Are they really the descendants of our heroic emperor? The peak of the empire passed with the past emperor. The Marquis, like a thunderbolt from the sky, will lead the warriors to victory, eclipsing the radiance of his predecessor's glory. The appearance of a talented military leader capable of protecting the country's borders will remind the inhabitants that he is not only the grandson of a renowned hero, but also of Baltimore Heights, the Great Lion. Of course, there may be opponents to this agreement, but most people will support the marriage of the man. Ringen. Jake understood that the Count was right. Bolt's ascension to the throne was inevitable. This will happen when the imperial princess passes to another world. But it is unclear why Lady Claire would accompany the Marquis on such an important journey. After all, people might think that the Lord was seduced by a witch. These words amused Schwiven. The girl could really be considered a witch for her exceptional talents. At noon, she remembered all the rules of grammar. Such talent must not be wasted. But Kinnitz didn't really like the idea of hiding Claire under the guise of a priest. But there was no other option. In the past generation, women surpassed men in incapacity, for example. Empress Berta and Marquise Oberta, who played a very important role in the country's structure. All this indicates that Claire's talent cannot be wasted. Many nobles try to offer their daughters to the Marquis, willing to jump into his bed. And this woman managed to distract him. If she gets pregnant, then you can take a winning position and leave her at court. In addition to her 3 children, so that she is afraid to betray. After all these discussions, Jake should have no doubts about the necessity of this woman for the Marquis. Claire wore not only a black hooded cloak, but also the name of the priest Thomas, who sucked the carriage and invited his comrade to serve himself bread, because ahead was a bumpy road. But the girl was not hungry, she just squeezed her purse tighter. She was nervous. It seemed to her that all the people around her were crazy for not understanding that she was not a priest and, moreover, she was not a man. The Count must be crazy in the Empire. Priests are even allowed to draft official documents, even though they are conservatives who have lived their entire lives within monastery walls. Upon discovering that she is a woman, they will never forgive her. And the Marquis is the craziest of all for allowing all this to happen, dragging a woman to a meeting with the Archduke. Keeping it secret. Claire carried dye in her bag. She urgently needed to dye her hair, otherwise the roots that had grown back would be noticeable. But it was not clear how to do it. At night, the procession finally stopped. Bolt and Max were the first to dismount. The long journey must have been exhausting. Unfortunately, the place did not have enough rooms to accommodate all the priests. So they would have to sleep in barracks. In the master's rooms, the table was covered with a variety of delicacies. And the Marquis was swirling a glass of wine in his hands. He had been thinking about that night for a long time. Was it really possible that a simple female provocation could turn his head so much? They were indescribable emotions, but they seemed as strange as they were frightening to him. Bolt was very afraid then that Claire would die by his own hands. He could kill her whenever he wanted. And this thought enraged the Marquis. A glass of wine flew against the wall. The knight burst into the room, worrying if everything was all right, and the Lord kept thinking about the fact that for the first time he experienced the fear of losing. Mornhate's hand was dripping wine or blood, and he himself decided that since he couldn't understand his emotions, he needed to keep the woman with him as long as possible. So he ordered Priest Thomas to be brought immediately. The only thing Bolt was fully aware of was that taking Claire to the Archduke's palace. And secretly, too, was too stupid a risk. At that moment, the door opened again. The knight brought the priest. In the worst case, the Marquis would have to renounce all rights to the throne, even if they were part of the journey. The knight left the room, and Bolt removed the girl's hood, revealing her beautiful face. For the most part, he no longer cared about the circumstances. He didn't even really know why he took Claire with him, so he simply pulled her towards him and kissed her. Then there were kisses on the neck. The girl tried to stop him when she noticed his twisted hand, but he asked her to concentrate. The knight had just called her in front of all the priests, and then, from the threshold, the Marquis pressed his lips against hers so avidly. The couple couldn't see peace. Chase knocked on the door with papers. The man found Lord Thomas and the priest at work, so he simply left the documents. But I still mentally realized that this priest was too small. Claire was beside herself with fear and anger. The Marquis didn't let her go, even though they were almost caught. After all, if she had been declassified, the Lord would have had a lot of trouble. But Bolt explained that if he was afraid of this, he simply wouldn't have taken Claire with him. However, he had never seen her so scared. He didn't believe he would ever see that expression on her face. The girl decided to ask why Bolt took her with him. It's really all because someone needs to warm the marquise bed, but he handed her some papers and asked her to translate them into Latin. The godfather praised the girl's skills, so Morn Heights wants to check for himself. While the widow translated, the lord read. Out of the corner of her eye, Claire noticed a wound on his hand again and decided to find out where it came from. But she quickly became embarrassed and did not participate in the ambiguous conversation. Therefore, I changed the subject to the question of why the Marquis needed to translate his travel diary. After all, not everyone knows Latin. It will be more difficult for other people to understand it. And this surprised Bolt. He noticed that Claire is not at all like Jake. Despite being a noble, he never contradicts, while Claire, even being a commoner, is always trying to hold onto something. She even tried to argue this observation, but only confirmed to herself that she was glad to be different from a man with outdated principles. Bolt explained that Jake had spoiled him all his life. This is how his family raised him. He has such a defensive reaction. He is nervous for any reason and protects the master. Claire was surprised that the Marquis was now defending Baron Kinnitz's honor. Sometimes the other side of Marquis Mornhates is unexpectedly revealed to her. He rules his domains ruthlessly. But now he seems guilty and responsible for other people's lives. Everyone at birth receives what is due to them. They do not have the opportunity to choose what kind of life to live. That's right, because Claire didn't choose anything either. So the Marquis doesn't need to worry about the past. After what he has seen and done, he should only feel that life is too short. Just as he lived his life honestly, Baron Kinnitz did the same. Ball ran his finger over the girl's lips and then kissed her passionately. He decided that since he couldn't contain his desires, he would at least be honest with himself. And the Marquis remained between Claire's thighs. She was trembling all over and gripping the lord's hair with her hand. It was almost impossible to tolerate this, so the girl asked him to stop. Bolt raised his head and was surprised. The girl explained that the sensations were too strange. The Marquis kissed her hand, believing that there was something more hidden behind those words. The widow noticed that the knight had never done this before, and he replied that he regretted not having done so. They approached the bed, and Claire understood that tomorrow she would be tired all day again. At the same time, I tried to understand my feelings. Today they were a little different. Bolt got rid of his clothes and began to get rid of Claire's clothes. Morning arrived. In the courtyard, the knights were preparing to leave. Max burst into the Marquis's room. Mornhates was getting dressed and reacted aggressively when the captain of the order entered without knocking. Max was surprised that the lord overslept because he is always on time for everything. But on the other hand, a soft bed will not be seen for a long time. So this makes sense. The team will have to cross the harsh Maltese mountains. Their backs start hurting just thinking about it. Claire woke up to the sound of voices, stretched sleepily, and covered herself with the blanket. Behind the curtain, she saw the silhouettes of two men talking and realized with horror that she had fallen asleep in the Marquis's room. While trying to find her things, Max heard a noise and was afraid there was an intruder in the room. But judging by the Marquis's calm, he assumed the lord had spent the night with a woman. Only that this woman was actually sent by the owner of this house. Bolt smiled sarcastically and said that Priest Thomas was in his bed. And at first Max calmed down, not attaching any importance to this fact, and then it all dawned on him. The sun was already high when the procession reached the foot of the Maltese mountains. It was customary to stop here, after making sure there were no bandits nearby. The knight was convinced that no one would dare attack the Marquis's entourage. But Max explained that, easily, there could be someone waiting for the distracted noble on the border of Puisin. After this, the captain of the order approached Priest Thomas, notifying him that it was possible to depart. Max told the girl that they had decided to rest in this place, before venturing further into the Maltese mountains. They will stay in the forest for several days, and since no one knows the true identity of Priest Thomas, Lady Claire cannot stray far from Max. But the girl interrupted the captain of the order's instructions, asking him to go wash her hair. After a while, a girl with a pile of jars was kneeling in front of a stream. Even though the captain was cursing and indignant, Claire was happy to find this place, because the color had almost started to show. She began to dye her hair so that no one would notice her when returning to Puissant. Because of her unique hair and eye color, she had to spend her entire life running away, not even knowing who was really chasing her. And then Claire fell into the clutches of the most heartless man. He is as cold as the wind of heights, but his touch makes her whole body burn. It's terrible because she is thinking about this. She needs to get ready quickly. But then an arrow stabbed into the ground, and after that its owner appeared, a man in a black cloak, showing a sword. The thief smiled and put his sword to the priest's neck, warning him not to open his mouth. Claire tried to figure out how to ask the captain for help, but the bandit, as if reading her thought, replied that the knights were already having fun with other thieves. The demon on the girl's shoulder reminded her that she had fallen into a trap again. So it was time to finally surrender to the clutches of death. After all, she always considered death an escape from any situation. And now no one will save her. It is better to die now than to be annoyed in the future, as always. Yes, to die at the hands of a bandit. Even Aunt Helda accepted such a death. No one would condemn him. But Claire is desperate to accept reality and not run away from it. Therefore, sand flew into the thief's eyes. A second to think, the girl thought she could escape. But the bandit was faster, grabbed the priest by the hand, pulling him towards him. Claire screamed when suddenly a characteristic slurp was heard. The thief fell to the ground and Bolt was behind him, his face distorted by fear. Still holding the bloody sword in his hand, he ran towards the girl, trying to find out if she was all right. He shouted, trying to get an answer if Claire was hurt, but she remained silent, and only thought about how the Marquis was sweating. She had never seen him breathe so heavily outside the bedroom. My head started spinning. Everything around me was swimming. The widow tried to curse that she had to wait too long, but suddenly strength completely left her subtle body, and Claire fell unconscious in the Marquis's arms. At the edge of the forest, the blood of the tied bandits spilled out one by one. Bolt personally executed everyone with his sword, summoning one person at a time. In the end, the blue-eyed thief asked for it to stop. He admitted that he was the leader, and that he would pay because the others acted on his orders. Bolt calmly replied that the bandits acted on the orders of an incompetent leader, so they should pay for their misdeeds. The leader tried to justify himself by saying they hadn't killed anyone. Yes, the crew had suffered, but there was no need to kill over it. Bolt was very angry, because if he hadn't arrived in time, the outcome would have been completely different. Max at that moment asked the Lord to control himself. After all, the priest is already under a doctor's supervision. He said he felt fine, so we must investigate the situation calmly. Someone might be behind the attack, but the leader of the bandits considered these arguments flawed. With tears in his eyes, he explained that they only wanted to rob the crew, but had no intention of injuring or killing anyone. And the priest was captured to frighten and extort. If the blue-eyed man had known that everything would turn out this way, he would have stayed sitting on the ship in the Jurassic Sea. The way the bandit spoke sounded very familiar. Moreover, the color of his hair reminded him of someone, and his words were quite logical. The leader kept begging the Marquis for the lives of his gang, because for him they are like brothers, offering his life in exchange for theirs. The decision was in the hands of the Marquis. Bolt pulled his sword from its scabbard. Closer to the river, the doctor treated the wound on Priest Thomas's hand. The doctor also insisted that the cloak had to be removed to examine the patient for wounds elsewhere. Claire, of course, was worried, but the man said he already knew who he was. The doctor examined the girl all over and also noticed that if a scar remained somewhere, Helda would be very angry. Claire was surprised to hear her aunt's name. It turned out that the doctor was helping the woman heal the thorn wounds received following a previous incident. Upon remembering this woman, the serious doctor became embarrassed and asked if Helda was talking about him. Claire remembered that her aunt was always the center of attention, although it was very annoying to her. The girl thought carefully and remembered that she seemed to have heard about the doctor from Helda's lips. And the doctor sketched a happy smile. Claire at that moment wondered how he managed to fall in love with her aunt and, in general, how people understand what love is. She had always been interested in what love was. The girl had never had it and didn't understand what was special about it. Claire read about this in books and seemed to understand everything, but now she realizes that she is still far from understanding it. The lyrical moment of thinking about love under the setting sun was interrupted by screams coming from the other side of the forest. The doctor's face became gloomy. He was about to go retrieve the corpses because he was convinced that the Marquis had killed everyone. And every one of them. Claire was not so convinced of this because this man can also be extraordinarily kind. To be honest, even Max was surprised that the Marquis spared the remaining bandits. He appreciated the master's generosity, but still wanted to know the reasons for such an act in order to explain himself to the knights. Bolt approached the leader of the gangster community to clarify about life on the ship, and confirmed that he had worked with the gang on the ship before. Max was trying to understand where the connection was, if the Marquis was really trying to get information about the pirates. At that moment, the doctor returned, reporting that the priest remained resting by the stream. Bolt quietly approached Claire, not listening to Max's questions about what to do next with the bandits. Just like the captain's silence, the captain was shocked by the woman who, after her experience, decided to be alone. Yes, something strange had been happening to her from the beginning, and these thoughts led Max to understand the solution to the Marquis's mercy. Of course, the main bandit and that woman have obvious similarities, their cheeky way of speaking, and even their appearance. That is the reason Bolt left him alive. Meanwhile, the Lord himself arrived at the stream near which Claire was sitting. His gaze was a little sad, and the girl asked if Bolt had killed all the bandits. This was not indifferent to him, because in case of their death, he would like to honor their memory. Because even such bad people can have a family. This amazed the Marquis. It could be that, after what they did to her, this woman was thinking about such things. Claire looked at Bolt's ashamed face, her eyes full of compassion, and it seemed to her that he was worried about her. She explained that she only got away with a scratch, which was nothing compared to her ankle. Bolt looked at her seriously and asked if she was still offended. The girl felt ashamed and said she didn't know, that she was simply irritable from the feeling of discomfort. But I must admit that she is much better now, and besides, I wonder why the Marquis is suddenly interested in her health. Bolt approached Claire and replied that he didn't want to hurt her anymore, and then kissed her. The girl asked him why this bothered him, but he didn't know, so he answered with a question. Claire was surprised, because in books love was described as something magical. But it seems that even such a difficult relationship can be called love, although this idea is stupid and naive. Then finally, the Rosemontag Festival began in Poison. Everything started with people praying tirelessly for a rich harvest, which meant the arrival of spring. But when Emperor Ringan passed away, the very essence of the festival changed the nobles attending. They boasted about luxury, which was a measure of their power. They took advantage of the value of the gifts they brought to the Archduke to demonstrate the power they held over him. Ultimately, this festival has turned into a meeting of influential figures. The Archduke was impatient waiting for the Mornhates to arrive, and the letter about the bandit attack did not move him. Edwin was angry because Bolt had to open the parade to show the strength of his bond. The faithful servant asked the master not to get nervous. This is the Marquis's first public appearance after the war. The imperial margraves have arrived here, so people will admire the Archduke's strength. The words of strength calmed Edwin, who turned to Brody and asked if she remembered the task assigned to her. The girl should start smiling. Otherwise, her father won't let her go anywhere if she sits with that face in front of the Marquis. Today she must charm the Marquis. Anyway, her only advantage is her blonde hair, like her mother's, so it's time to prove her usefulness. Suddenly, the servant ran to the window and began to draw the master's attention. The sound of hooves was heard on the street, flags waved, and finally the Marquis arrived. The brave Red Lion arrived in Pison. He looked very much like his father Martel. The town rejoiced. A young blonde girl watched the procession from the balcony. The sun was setting. 4 girls were sitting in the garden at the tea table. They admired the wonderful flowers that surrounded everyone. She knows that the Archduke cultivated this garden especially for Lady Brodie. The Archduke must have valued his daughter very much, but the lady herself just laughed softly. She always felt uncomfortable attending those meetings. The ladies whom her father invited for tea have gathered here. Each of them is from a very influential family. You must befriend them at all costs. The girls at that moment were discussing the last person to arrive at the festival. The Marquis of Morn Heights. The ladies admired the lord's appearance and said they had never seen such a handsome man, who also inherited his title at such an early age. He arrived with such a small number of knights, but he had already eclipsed all previous guests. Lady Brodie should be happy. After all, her husband would be a very handsome man, and the girls started laughing. Everyone in the Empire is waiting for this wedding. It's so romantic that the grandson and granddaughter of 2 heroes will marry. Lady Brodie herself was in no hurry to rejoice, but was confused when suddenly one of the ladies pointed to 2 men behind the rose bushes. It was the Marquis with one of the knights. The lord also noticed the ladies, so he bowed and went in another direction. The girls continued laughing and admiring the beauty of the man they now saw up close. And Lady Brodie cannot understand what feelings she is experiencing now. She will be truly happy after her wedding with the Marquis. She had never thought about getting married before. But the interlocutors turned to the girl again to ask what she thought about it. She remembered her father's words that if she didn't marry the Marquis, she wouldn't be useful as a girl. So she replied that she was also looking forward to meeting the Marquis. Night fell. Bolt was sitting in his office with documents. A knight entered to announce that the rest of the group would arrive tomorrow night. The Marquis thanked the man and dismissed him, wondering if he himself needed to rest. Rubbing his eyes, Bolt looked towards Claire, who was also sorting papers. She suddenly turned to him with a question. But at that very moment she disappeared. Since it was only a vision, the Marquis realized he had a serious problem. Soon a ball took place in Langto Castle. The guests wore beautiful suits. The hall was illuminated by many bright lamps and sparkling jewels. The Archduke greeted the assembled nobles. Lady Brodie felt out of place. Everyone around her constantly whispered about the Marquis, who hadn't even deigned to appear yet. This irritated Edwin. The lady looked at her father and remembered the nanny's words that this banquet could change her life a lot if she improved her relationship with the Marquis. With the Archduchess absent, the first dance must be between the daughter and the father. The Archduke will then conditionally hand the lady over into the Marquis's hands. This would be an opportunity to seduce the Marquis, and Lady Brodie didn't like that word very much. There was excitement in the hall. Everyone looked at Bolt Mornhates, who entered the hall. The Marquis looked dazzling in a black suit with gold embroidery and a long fur-lined coat. He greeted His Excellency Archduke Edwin and Lady Brodie, and then kindly took the girl's hand and kissed her, looking into the eyes of the Archduke's daughter. She was confused and still didn't understand how she needed to seduce this man. In the end, she didn't even have the chance to dance with the Marquis, let alone seduce him, because at one point he seemed to disappear through the floor. A noise was heard in the corridor. People were looking for the Marquis and trying to understand at what point he had left. While Lady Brodie was dancing with her father, she saw the knight approach the lord and tell him something. Bolt smiled and disappeared. The Archduke was beside himself with anger. How could he leave so easily in the middle of a banquet? And the daughter reassured her father, assuring him that there was probably a good reason for it. The Marquis did not return later, and surprisingly, Lady Brodie only felt relief. At that moment, the rest of the crew arrived at Langto Castle. Max was simply exhausted, because he convinced the Marquis to GO first so as not to miss the parade. And then the carriage wheel fell off, and he had to take care of the rest of the group. All this suffering should be paid for with a vacation. With this thought, the knight himself arrived, and his first question was about the whereabouts of Claire. The captain began to talk about the trip and his works, but the Lord again asked where Priest Thomas was. And he set off in the direction Max indicated. Count Schwibben's son was horrified by the night's act, apparently. He had completely lost his mind because of the woman. There was a smell of roses everywhere since the Marquis arrived. This aroma has been giving me a headache. This disgusting smell drives you crazy, but suddenly Bolt saw a familiar silhouette. Among the bushes of hated plants stood the most beautiful woman. The thick aroma of trees and the bitter smell of grass, like all other smells. He can finally inhale them all. The Marquis pressed with all his might against Claire's slender body, noticing that she had lost a lot of weight during the journey. She tried to distance herself a little and excused herself by saying it was impossible to lose weight in a couple of days. The Marquis licked the girl's long fingers, pulled her towards him again, and something hard rested on Claire's thigh. The priest's cloak fell to the ground, and Bolt pressed his lips on the girl's shoulder. Holding her by the waist, priests and knights unloaded the things they had brought, while the Marquis kissed his woman on a garden bench. He bumped against her again and again, although Claire was incredibly worried that someone might see them. Bolt assured her that he would immediately sense any presence, so the girl had nothing to worry about. She just needed to relax and enjoy. However, when the knight went beyond kissing her neck, Claire stopped him again. She explained that she had just come from the road, so she hadn't had time to wash. The girl seemed very embarrassed, with messy hair and flushed cheeks. This circumstance did not scare the Marquis, who spent most of his time on the battlefield. So jokingly, he bit Claire on the finger. Bolt was so happy to finally relax that he didn't understand why this woman was always so worried. On the other hand, he was glad that now she was behaving consciously towards him. Claire was surprised that he kept touching her. Besides, she needed something stronger and more exciting, so she whispered her desire in his ear. At that moment, Max's voice was heard. Who was looking for Priest Thomas, the captain of the order was surprised to find the Lord here. Claire was hiding under her cloak behind his broad back, listening to the Marquis's malicious comments about the guest who appeared at the wrong time. But what horrified the girl the most was what he had just whispered to the knight. After a while, Claire finally plunged into a warm bath and felt alive again. Bolt tried to accompany her directly to the door. He behaves like an animal. He really likes that. On the other hand, Claire enjoys it too. At first, she intended to hurt him as much as he hurt her. But instead of simply using her, as time went by, he seemed to forget his original goal. By the way he touches her and the way he speaks, it seems that the Marquis truly values this woman. And even now, she has allowed him to take control of her. I just wonder if everyone enjoys sex, and if all men want their woman as much as he does. There wasn't a single book about sex in the library where Claire was stolen from. All women in the Empire learn about sex the same way. Noble women learn from their nannies who have children, and commoners from their mothers. Claire cannot ask Aunt Yelda about this, as she is not even married. So at those moments, the girl would also like to have a mother. This thought horrified her, because a long time ago, she had decided that she lived well alone, without her parents. At that moment, Max informed Bolt that since his room now belonged to Priest Thomas, he himself would spend the night with the master. Since the Marquis accepted emotionlessly, the captain realized that Bolt would spend that night with that woman again. By the way, the Lord asked if the white horse was ready, because tomorrow he was going to present a gift to Lady Brodie. Yes, today to sleep with a woman and tomorrow to give a white horse to another. Max could not comprehend these noble habits. He also didn't understand if Bolt was really going to marry Lady Brodie. The Marquis was annoyed by Max's curiosity about his affairs. He didn't want to interfere in the captain's affairs, but rather understand many suspicious aspects. One thing that happened in the Malta Mountains says it all. The Wald Mornhates he knows would not be so cruel. And on the other hand, he would not show pity for mosquitoes like them. This man has changed too much, and the reason can only be that woman. Wald decided to change the subject, and said that it was time for Max to think about getting married himself. Starting tomorrow, they would attend banquets together to choose the right lady. The Marquis placed his hand on his friend's shoulder and told him it was high time he started organizing his life. Max, naturally, was not ready for such conversations and thought Mornhates had gone mad. The Lord decided that the captain was not ready to listen seriously now, so he turned around and was about to leave, but Max stopped him and asked him to think about the words he had said about that woman. At that moment, Claire was sleeping sweetly in a soft bed. Bolt entered the room, recalling Max's words about how he had been behaving out of place lately. But he can cut off the head of every one of those bandits at any moment and will marry Lady Brody if it is beneficial. And he always takes what he wants, and if he gets tired of something, he can easily get rid of it. He does everything based on his feelings, so he lay down next to Claire. Morning arrived. Lady Brody was walking in the garden. Her health was excellent, as always. The weather was good for a walk, and since the Marquis disappeared during the ball, the nanny hadn't taken her eyes off her. She probably thinks the lady is fine, so she constantly asks about her well-being. Brody was still worried that her father would get angry. He was so indifferent to blood relatives. What if he considers her completely useless and exiles her, as happened with her mother the lady? She doesn't want that fate. Brody was pulled out of her sad thoughts by the nanny's surprise. She noticed in the distance the figure of a man on horseback. The Marquis himself approached the lady. He looked irresistible. The man was wearing a wonderful suit. Brody said that animals were not allowed in the garden. Mornhates knew this, but he wanted to present the gift in person. In this empire, dresses and diamonds are a suitable gift for a lady. And he gives her a white horse. The Marquis does not follow the rules dictated by society. Maybe with him you can also become free. Later, the Marquis sat in the study with the rest of the nobles, discussing the damage that the pirates had caused to the ships of Puisin. And then it was Bolt who was in charge of security. Therefore, he is very interested in what the Viscount Baron is trying to say. The truth is that pirates are getting more powerful every day. We cannot turn a blind eye to the dealings of these bastards who don't even know where they come from. This is the truth. And who knows? Maybe the ships from Geneva will be next, no doubt. Someday, they might threaten the security of the entire empire. The cavalry and navy captains of Paysan are, in fact, useless idiots who only got their positions thanks to the Archduke's lineage. So Edwin suggested that the Marquis personally train the Paysan army. Bold met Claire in the library. She listened to how the master received the order from ire to battle. The Marquis was really going to fight the pirates. He thought that the Genevan knights did not have the proper experience in naval battles. Not that he doubts the Lord, but he heard that the leader of the pirates is called King of Pirates. Even someone like Mornhates can stumble and lose. Bolt replied confidently that the one who enjoys the battle always wins. That is the whole secret of the great warrior's victories. The Marquis approached the girl. He took her chin and told her that there were only two paths that could lead to knowing his legendary sword. Bolt will either become the best warrior in the Empire or a complete madman. The sword is thirsty for blood. That bloodlust reminds Claire of him. Bolt moved even closer and licked the woman's neck. He pulled her towards him. Her slender legs began to tremble. But at that moment, Max entered the library. Claire quickly put on the hood. And the Marquis threatened the captain with death because he ordered that no one should enter. But the reason was good. Lady Brody entered the room apologizing for interrupting the Marquis's rest. The Lord apologized for being rude, because he acted rudely because he didn't know she was here. Brody herself apologized for the sudden intrusion, but she had heard that the Marquis was heading to the border of Puisin in the Jurassic Sea. So she embroidered a scarf in the hope that he would return safe and sound. Bold accepted the gift and said he would protect it like the girl of his eyes. Claire looked closely at Lady Brody. Now she could see why everyone idolized her so much and believed that she would become the next marquise. She is so charming and elegant that it is no wonder she is the blessed daughter of that very Archduke. Claire was incredibly embarrassed. Max even noticed that the widow looked so confused today. Probably the fact is that the difference in the appearance of the girls is obvious. Lady Brody at that moment said that some members of the Morin Heights group were still huddled in the barracks due to a lack of rooms. So she was ready to offer the Lengthyu monastery. Max said they already had rooms assigned, but they couldn't stay in the monastery because of their profession. The lady apologized for such a reckless suggestion. At that moment, the maid went and was called by the mistress of the castle. Brody suggested using the large basement wardrobe to find a new suit for the priest, because his cloak was large and uncomfortable. The men unanimously thanked the lady for her generosity, but refused the offer. Claire understood that Lady Brody had no bad intentions, but the last thing she wanted was to feel pity from her specifically. The lady was desperately trying to help, but she found it too difficult to understand what it was like to be the recipient of all this infinite generosity. At that moment, other nobles were discussing whether they could trust the Marquis. He may be the leader among the Margraves, but he had no experience in naval battles. Here the Archduke intervened, informing that there might be an untold number of pirates on the sea route. The Marquis explained that the proposed strategy would not work if at least one ship was damaged. After all, it was rare to encounter an animal that would attack one larger than itself. Edwin decided that since the nobles themselves had entrusted the Marquis with solving the problem, there was no point in worrying about what might happen. If everything goes well, then everyone will win, but otherwise, Bolt's failure can be used against him to finally bring him under their control. A new day arrived. Priest Thomas walked silently down the corridor, clutching tightly to his heart the precious key to Lady Brody's personal wardrobe. While cleaning, the maids talked about the lady's upcoming wedding, and the Marquis was unclear why he was risking it. And going out to sea. It is rare to find a bride like Lady Brody. She is the highest-ranking noble in the Empire. They will make the most beautiful couple in history, just like Emperor Ringan and Empress Berta. Claire listened to these conversations and understood that, despite her status, this place did not belong to a noble lady. After all, if the Marquis has already fallen head over heels in love, why doesn't he leave the library? Max learned about Bolt's plans and was surprised that they had to face the pirates with only one ship. If he was going to achieve this, why didn't they provide the Teutonic Order of Knights? Unlike the Mournhates, they have experience in naval battles. Regardless of the talent the Marquis possesses, he doesn't believe that the war against the pirates is not in line with his skills. He also only took 100 knights with him, so Max is upset about being stuck here with a nightmare master. At that moment, Bolt opened the map to show a diagram of the ocean. Marked in red are the points where currents change direction, probably when tidal changes occur. The currents are so strong that they create whirlpools that can capsize ships. So the challenge is to lure the pirates into these areas so they can be eliminated all at once. Max was interested to know where Bolt learned this information. Only those who had lived here almost their entire lives could know it. The Marquis explained that the bandit had betrayed everything. Now they were on their way to Lengthyu with that man, so they would join a little later. The Morin Heights Knights learned this information from the thieves. Max was surprised. He also couldn't believe that Bolt was acting so emotionally just for a woman, so he was right that there was something more behind this action. But is Bolt really sure that the pirates will fall for his trap? The Marquis explained that all monsters couldn't resist biting the bait, even knowing that it could be dangerous. The more confident a predator is, the more tempted it is to fall into a trap. This is an uncontrollable instinct. All these thoughts led Bolt himself to a dead end of thoughts about Claire. The woman herself was at that moment in the wardrobe, which had previously been used as a storeroom here. There should be many things. Lady Brody is a noblewoman. I wonder why this concern for an ordinary priest. Things might change if Claire refuses his kindness, so she will just take a suit and leave. Each of them is made of expensive fabrics and studded with diamonds. It was as if all the highest taxes collected from people from all territories gathered right here. Here she is, the Archduke's daughter, wearing these suits and hanging stones like a peacock trying to seduce the Marquis. And all to take the place of the princess, which is empty to this day. On the one hand, a naive lady who loves luxury, and on the other, a marquis obsessed with the thirst for blood. And women, and people believe that he will repeat the fate of Emperor Ringan and Empress Berta. They don't know how the Empress died. After the Emperor died of illness, the Archduke, who was crazy about his father's wife, tried to dishonor her. The Empress tried to escape, but was caught, so she decided to pay with her life in the name of her reputation. How can people call the Archduke's daughter the most incomparable lady? It's time to think about the image and get out of here. Now she realizes how much she misses Aunt Helda. At that moment, the Marquis entered the dressing room, instantly finding himself next to Claire, and put his arm around her waist. He said he couldn't find the girl for a long time because she wasn't where Max told him to look. The Marquis pressed her to him, but Claire resisted because she didn't want to do this here. So Bol looked her in the eyes and gently kissed her hand like a true lady. He also asked her to swear on honor that she was telling the truth now. The Marquis placed Claire on the table and kissed her for a long time in the dressing room. Soft moans were heard. Suddenly, a strange canvas fell over the couple, who were locked in a passionate kiss. They got out from under the fabric to see where it fell from, and Claire saw an incredibly beautiful dress. She froze in admiration, and Bolt asked her if she would like to try it on. But the girl was convinced that such a dress would only suit a lady as elegant as Lady Brody. It wouldn't be suitable for an ordinary maid like her, but the Marquis disagreed with this. It doesn't matter if Claire is a maid or not. It doesn't change the fact that she is a woman of Bolt Morin Heights. There is not a single thing in the world that does not suit her, and no one can embarrass her for anything. If she wants something, he will get it. And even if she still wants to be a maid voluntarily, so stop resisting. It's time to put on a dress before the Marquis himself puts it on the girl. So, after some manipulations, Claire came out in a new outfit, and Bolt couldn't take his eyes off her. The turquoise color and gemstones emphasized the unusual color of the girl's eyes. And the lace looked great on her slender body. She was embarrassed by the unusual outfit, and Bolt silently admired her beauty. In the end, she composed herself and said that it suited her very well. She also asked him not to show this side of himself to anyone else, or Bolt would be worried about leaving her. Still, Claire wondered what would happen if she showed up. The Marquis kissed the girl, smiled, and said that he would tear out the eyes of that bastard from their sockets. In the morning, Priest Thomas was already sitting on a park bench reading while the birds sang. This morning, the Marquis gathered the warriors and headed to the Jurassic Sea. No one knows how long the battle will last. He left her a book with photographs of the blonde emperor so that she would be a good girl. The Marquis has been surprisingly kind lately, even yesterday. He said the dress suited her very well and that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. This book is very rare, so I need to read it quickly while I have the chance. But for some reason, I can't concentrate at all. Lately, she relaxes too much and gets distracted when she is not working. Claire was about to return and find something to do when suddenly she saw a terrifying man. The Archduke came here specifically for the blue-eyed man. Edwin was warned that the blue-eyed girl lived in the dependency and therefore belonged to the Marquis. But he still wanted to look at the hair, so he ordered the knights to remove the priest's cloak. Claire resisted, trying to convince the Archduke that he was a man, and Edwin was not ashamed of this, as long as her hair was red. The Archduke had almost taken off his cloak, when suddenly, a loud voice warned the Lord not to do this. The doctor blocked Claire with his body and said that this priest was sick with the plague. That's why it is necessary to isolate him as soon as possible. But the Archduke and his entourage quickly took the opposite direction. Once safe, the doctor asked Claire how she felt. The girl was beside herself with horror, trembling all over and unable to utter a word. At that moment, the Marquis's ship was cutting through the ocean waves, and the current was intensifying. The leader of the bandits informed the Lord that they had reached the same location. Bolt was happy, everything seemed like a good place for a grave. Max and the Marquis looked at the map, and the blue-eyed man confirmed that pirates appeared in this location more often than usual. This area is too close to land because the ocean is clear. If a ship sinks there, there will be no turning back, so pirates choose this area to rob. If a person falls overboard, they might survive, although this is too humane for pirates. Yes, nobles robbed their properties, wealth, and even families to cover their losses. It is ironic that pirates show unnecessary and misplaced compassion. The gang leader mustered the courage and asked the Marquis. If the plan worked, it would allow his friends and their families to live in Geneva. And even if the blue-eyed thief dies in this war, he still asks to keep his promise. Bolton laughed and said that no one would have to fight because they would flee. A white embroidered scarf flew through the air to the astonished crew's gaze. A ship was seen on the left, 10 ships. One of the knights wondered if it was worth continuing in that direction. Max confidently replied affirmatively. We need to give more sailors to the sails so that we can sail with the wind when the time comes. Many knights rushed to the deck to take positions, but the bandit said he had never seen so many ships. Bolt wonders if this is something abnormal and supernatural, and the thief explained that he had never seen more than 5 ships in this place. The Marquis and his friend were not at all scared by this. They continued joking among themselves. And then they decided to look at the flag. A gray scythe on a black background. They destroy everything in their path, even if they have to sacrifice their loot. They are the most dangerous pirates, the most bloodthirsty. But it seems that instead of these conversations, the ship's crew needs to speed up. And boarding chain flew towards the noble ship. Some closed their eyes in horror upon realizing they were doomed, when suddenly a legendary sword flashed in the air. With a single blow, Bolt Mournhates cut the chain, thus saving the lives of several sailors. It was impossible to cut this sharp hook in half so easily, but in the hands of the legendary warrior was the legendary sword of Iscaron. The bandit just now realized that the nobles were not joking then. The pirates continue to pursue the ship zealously, which means they have not yet realized that it is a trap. No, they still understood, but the bait is too sweet. From the beginning, there was no reason to be nervous because the Marquis of Regents and the Margraves were next to this ship. Bolt gave the order to Max, who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. A call signal sounded high on the mast. The thief was terrified because they had not yet reached the ambush site. But Max convincingly asked him not to doubt the best warrior in the Empire. Because he has a plan. In the distance, ships with the Archduke's coat of arms appeared. The thief didn't understand at all what was happening. The plan had to be changed last night. For this, the Archduke was visited by Max and Bolt. The Marquis explained his late visit by saying that there was a rat among the Archduke's knights. Puissant's army may be weak, but it has superiority in numbers and ammunition. But it loses to surprise attacks. So the Marquis is ready to catch the rat as a gift for the Archduke. One of the knights tried to make the master doubt this idea, but he angered Edwin and received a glass of wine in the eye. But the Archduke understood that he supported the Marquis not because he liked him. Bold Mordenheitz himself, with the legendary sword in his hands, was ready for battle. A tied man dressed in a black suit was thrown at the Archduke's feet. He struggled and tried to say they had no right, but Bold smiled and replied that rats are not given words. Captain Xavier turned out to be a traitor. The Archduke had all the evidence in his hands, and Edwin was furious. The available documents clearly prove everything Martin did for a long time. The captain tried to justify himself. But suddenly, his speech was interrupted by a characteristic clucking sound. It seemed it was time to interrupt the gift presentation ceremony. After the bloodshed, the Marquis asked the Archduke not to delay the presentation of the return gift. Edwin was still annoyed that Ball was right and managed to corner him. Already in the evening, Max told Claire how the adventure went, for example. Xavier's entire family would be severely punished. It seems that at this rate, the streets will soon be filled with blood, but it will not be possible to watch the performance. Since tomorrow we will have to return. Information has been received about the need for reinforcements from the Lapas Mountains. Apparently, the invasion of the Malabo bastards has become an annual event. So half of the knights and margraves will join the fight immediately. And Max, Claire, and the rest of the knights will return to Geneva. By the way, the reason why the captain invited the girl for a walk was finally revealed. The Marquis stood in front of Claire in a dazzling white shirt. Max quickly moved away. Bolt had arranged for this place to be with the girl, so he quickly pulled her towards him. He presented her with a red rose and said that it seemed Claire remained indifferent to the past festival. The Marquis tucked a flower into Claire's hair, although she believed that such things did not suit her. Bolt agreed with her. Roses really didn't suit her, but he kissed her tenderly anyway. He would like something more charming and slightly fragrant, something that makes her feel comfortable. Like wildflowers from the high mountain fields that grow with the wind. The rustling of furniture in the garden was heard. Bolt leaned on Claire, but she asked him to stop because she felt pain. He was very angry because he would have to leave his girlfriend because of the damned Malabo bastards. Bolt whispered in Claire's ear to return to Volodar and wait for him there. And she also needed to be a good girl and not get into trouble. On the other hand, it was so stupid to ask her to wait when he had forced her to do so countless times. She still obeys him in everything to this day. Anyway, I wonder if there was ever a moment when she really waited for him. And now the Marquis is again asking Claire about this, because he can no longer imagine himself without this woman. In that tower and next to him. So he pressed her tighter and asked her to be obedient like now, and then he would give her a suitable reward. It is a meaningless promise that Bolt will keep repeating if she stays by his side. A few days later, in Boulder Castle, Jake greeted Max and the captain asked him how the butler was. Kinitz replied that they were one step away from war. He himself did not sleep for 3 days to have time to prepare all the requested supplies. Jake invited Max to look at the supplies, but suggested reading the document he had brought first. It was a letter that spoke of a man who had shown that he could achieve great things. Therefore, in the order, the Marquis appoints Claire as secretary of Boulder Castle. During a stop in the Lapas Mountains, the horses rested peacefully. And a fire burned between the tents. In the main tent, Bolt, Max, and Julian discussed the future plan of action in front of the map. The captain disagreed with Chrome's opinion, because the knights were exhausted from constant fighting. But it was impossible to predict the enemy's next move. The Marquis observed this argument in silence, and then simply suggested burning everyone to the ground so that this disgusting war would end. Although Julian was not entirely sure who said it, the Marquis or the captain. Bolt loves fighting so much that death itself trembles with fear when seeing him, so he could hardly use the word sick to describe war. Julian also felt that the Marquis missed Geneva, as they had been away from home for several weeks. But Bolt only noticed that today the sky was a very bright blue. Just like the girl's eyes, who was also looking out the window at that moment. Claire was absorbed in her work, but was distracted by a tickling sense of déjà vu while she was high up in the tower with the Marquis. Now she remembers the moments and realizes how long it has been since the moment the Marquis went to the mountain. Perhaps he is also admiring the sky now, like back then. Claire was pulled out of her thoughts by an irritated voice, clearly calling her not for the first time. The Count brought another pile of documents and asked the girl to concentrate to finish the work on time. Claire tried to resist, because such a volume of work would lead her to the grave. But Schweben said she only needed to translate everything from Frankish to Latin. These are requests for donations. Letters will be sent to high-ranking nobles of the empire. But these are not simple letters. The entire empire is swept by rumors about the lack of progress in the relationship between the Marquis and Lady Brodie. Therefore, every family where there is a daughter was visited by a feeling of hope. Everyone will respond instantly as soon as they receive the letter. They donate money to bribe the Marquis, which is exactly how the world of aristocracy works. Claire decided to clarify if the Lord was also interested in getting married soon. And the Count suspected that the girl was jealous. S.H. Schweben asked Claire not to have false hopes and to serve the future Marquise as faithfully as she now serves the Marquis. But the girl was not sure that she deserved any special treatment from the Lord, which irritated the Count. He explained that the heir's tower was built by the first Marquis of Newburgh. And this is not a place where the first person he meets is allowed to stay. So she should be grateful to Bolt for his kindness, and have the opportunity to give him the most beautiful gift a man can receive. It is surprising that 3 times she could not realize it. She needed to give birth to a son for the marquise. And while Claire was looking for words to respond to such impudence, a sailor walked through the port with a barrel on his shoulder. He saw a white scarf with embroidery among the cargo. It seems this thing is not cheap. He needs to give it to Claire. The young man bent down to pick it up. Another worker noticed this action and ordered him to stop. And then the barrel rolled. He began to shout that this was his product and grabbed the young man by the neck. But the ash-haired man could fend for himself. The sailor flew off in the other direction. The young man said he was going to do whatever he wanted on his last day here, because Endian was heading to meet his little sister. Claire walked through the winter forest. On such a night, the Count forced her to work late. It seems he really wants to take her to the grave. The girl has been working as an employee for 6 months, but her work is no less. And if you think about it, you can't say she likes it. However, she learned a lot from this job and can now express her thoughts. Now she finally feels alive, but it was not the time for daydreaming. She had to run home in time to wish the children good night. Suddenly, her legs began to slip, and the girl fell head over heels. A stream awaited her in front of her, and if she fell into it, she surely wouldn't get away with a slight frostbite. Of course, at that moment, she was saved by a handsome knight, who once again found himself in the right place at the right time. The Archduke at that moment was torn and angry because the negotiations had barely begun. And the Marquis had already left. He ordered his captain to carry out negotiations on his own and went somewhere. Edwin was angry because immediately after the naval battle, he had to marry the Marquis. And his daughter. One of the counts suggested sending a letter to Boldor, because preparations for the victory banquet had already begun. So Bolt should be present in any case. However, this plan will not work, as movement through the highlands is very difficult in winter. Furthermore, the peace negotiations are not yet over, so calling Bolt under the pretext of a banquet will only anger Bolt. And there is also a risk of undermining the Archduke's situation. Edwin shouted that he needed to send gifts to the Marquis, sparing no expense, to break him to pieces, but doing everything possible to get closer to Bolt before next spring. With the start of spring, they must be husband and wife, because if Lady Brodie enters the house of the Morn Heights, Edwin's grandson will inherit the great title. And since the Archduke can use Bolt's power and the people's love for his grandson, he will be able to wield power that cannot be compared to the power of the current emperor. This means Edwin will not have to wait for his own brother to die. At that moment, Bolt was lighting the fireplace to warm Claire. He said he didn't expect the Marquis to return so soon. The Lord explained that he didn't inform anyone of his return. He pressed against the girl. And she noticed he was completely wet and cold. It turned out he swam right in that stream and then gave Claire his cloak. The girl said he should still wash his hair, he just needs to find something to dry it with. However, Bolt quickly grabbed Claire by the waist and pulled her towards him. He asked again about the girl's well-being, the state of her leg, and she said everything was fine. The Marquis suggested that the next time she rolled down the slope, she should open her legs to slow down. Otherwise, she would break her skull. After making sure Claire was fine, he leaned on her so they could sleep together. Closing his eyes, he inhaled this aroma, which is why the war seemed so unusually long to him. Surrounded by the smell of blood, he kept recalling the scent emanating from this woman. In a matter of minutes, Claire could only hear the sobbing of a large body nearby. Now that she thought about it, she realized it had always been her who lost her temper first. And now Claire sees him sleeping peacefully, remembering that Lord Bolt was once a child. When Mrs. Rabilla told him this, the image didn't arise in her head, but when she sees him like this, she seems to understand what the nanny meant. The next day, many carriages filled the entire castle courtyard. Everyone was turning around. And Bolt and Jake were trying to figure out how many gifts the Archduke had sent. It was also interesting that he himself chose most of them. Most likely, all of this is related to Lapis. He was so sad that he could only send gifts, so he chose everything with apprehension. This was reported by Viscount Baron, who arrived as responsible for the transport of the gifts. So the Archduke expects rather payment for his kindness. Lady Brodie's riding skills improve every day, and she cannot wait to demonstrate them in person. Upon leaving, Bolt wished the Viscount a good rest before his imminent departure, which greatly offended the Baron. Count Schwaben expressed his irritation at the Archduke's handouts, as if the Marquis had already become his precious son-in-law. Bolt paid no attention to these arguments. He didn't care what Edwin thought. The Count insisted that the Archduke was asking everyone about the wedding. And soon rumors would spread throughout the empire. Bolt said he managed to push his accomplices to the headquarters of the Pisan army. 6 months later, immediately after the destruction of the pirates, a traitor was brought before my lord, who justified himself by saying that he provided certain information only to cover his son's gambling debts. And then they began to blackmail him, telling him that if he stopped doing this, the information would reach the Archduke. But the Marquis interrupted Count Redford's whining speeches. Having shown mercy to the desperate man, the Lord found in him an ally to keep the Archduke in check. The Count, after hearing this story, reminded Bolt that it was time to officially introduce the mistress of the clan. If this news spreads throughout the area, the Archduke's reputation will skyrocket. And then he will stop playing these games. Moreover, Claire is an intelligent girl, so it will be useful for the Marquis if he continues to keep her with him. Therefore, it would be good to present her in this state, but Bolt did not want to get involved in meaningless disputes. However, the Marquis still wondered how Claire herself would react if she heard such a proposal. At that moment, at the other end of the castle, the girl received instructions to watch the Marquis's bedroom. The maid reported that this was an order from Baron Kunitz himself. It turned out that the reason for this was Claire's comment about the mold last time. The butler was impressed and decided that the room needed supervision. The girl tried to refuse, but the maid convinced her that only she could handle this task. And besides, everything in the castle improved greatly with Claire's appearance. Lately, she had a lot to do, and people started asking her what she thought about such. Or which topic. But she was the lady of the tower. But influential people consult her only because she is the Marquis's woman. No, this cannot be. It's because she knows how to read and write and also think critically. And she also understands that everyone needs her. Wherever the girl goes, no one will stop her. But Claire is interested to know what will happen when the Marquis brings another woman to this bedroom. She hadn't seen the Lord since that day. Without the warmth of the fireplace and his cloak, it might have seemed like it was all just a dream. He never went looking for her since that day. Maybe he has already found a replacement. Or he is really going to get married. This is even stupid. The fear of losing the meager power she now has. Claire has already felt the pleasure of the meager power she has gained. Why is she still not aware of her place and cannot bear the life she deserves? She just needs to please the Marquis and maintain his interest in her person. At that moment, the object of Claire's thoughts and the owner of the room appeared at the door. He sarcastically commented that being here at such a time was too bold. Claire apologized for entering the room without permission. She was only here to check the condition of the room. He quickly approached the girl, bowed and told her he didn't expect such enthusiasm. The widow pressed against the sofa, perhaps because memories appeared in her head only a few seconds ago. She felt uncomfortable now. She explained that the task of checking the room was entrusted to her by Baron Kunitz. And the Marquis noticed that his woman had many different obligations. Claire felt ashamed. She looked away and said that everything happened by accident. The Marquis asked her if she was decorating this room, and she replied that she was only making a list. The merchants did the rest. Volta stroked the girl's cheek and asked her to remember that he loved bright colors. They are charming, especially blue. Claire needs to keep this information in her head. At that moment, she realized that only a couple of months remained until the arrival of spring. And then her presence here would be in question. The real mistress of the castle will arrive very soon, not a fake like Claire, but the one who can turn this beast into a truly influential figure. The true mistress. So now it costs her nothing to kick the lady out of the tower. The next day, Claire was with the Count in the library. They discussed letters and today's schedule. S.H. Waven said that the girl should learn to take responsibility when necessary, because she comes up with good ideas. She objected, saying that it was just the idea of an ordinary maid, but that she liked the Count's care. Schwaven saw that behind these supposedly modest speeches, there was arrogance. Her skills and talents faded over time only because she was born a commoner. So the Count suggested that the girl think about her adoptive father. And if the Schweven surname doesn't suit her, then she could find another that suits her talents. So it would be easier to establish herself at court than to simply be the wife of a marquis. The Count believes that Lady Brodie is not suitable for the role of Volador's lover, so they should have someone who would play the role of at least an unofficial mistress. Claire sat sadder than a cloud, because she believed that the Marquis himself wanted to get married. But Schweven called this idea stupid, and moreover did not want the girl to waste her talents. It is possible that Claire's life would be better if she acquired the status of a mistress, instead of the one who warms the Marquis's bed when he wants. Later, the girl from the forest got up on her skis and thought about this proposal from the Count. He presented everything as if he were worried about her, as if he were very good and kind, but in reality, he wanted to keep her close to satisfy his vile desires. One just has to forget and let go. The widow couldn't show herself in front of the children in that mood, especially today, when she returns home and they are still awake. Moreover, Claire now has incredible snowshoes that she borrowed from other servants. Walking in them is very refreshing. The girl felt free. Near her destination, the girl noticed a dark silhouette under a tree. Claire quickly passed by the Marquis, snow flying towards him from under her snowshoes. After a short conversation about the Count's proposal, Bolt noticed that the girl had become more arrogant since their last encounter. She apologized and said she did not intend to offend the knight. He also saw a deception in this. Claire made her tone even more serious and asked if the Marquis would like her to thank him for this offer of the status of official mistress of the castle. She feigned words of gratitude and Bolt laughed cheerfully, noticing that the girl was still the same. It was the first time Claire had seen such sincere laughter from the Marquis. And at that moment, he took her hand and suggested she follow him quickly, if she of course did not want to be devoured. After a while, they were already sitting in the tower. The Marquis handed the girl a flask. She smelled the liquid. It probably contained alcohol. Bolt was clearly tired, so he rested his head on the girl's shoulder and closed his eyes. Lately, he has been acting so strangely that he put her back in the tower. Although the house was already 2 steps away, he began to give her alcohol and use her as a pillow. Claire wondered if maybe she should really have a drink, and Bolt, with a half-asleep voice, asked the girl to bring a lantern next time she went for a walk in the forest. Quite a few wolves have been seen in the area. The Marquis loved watching them as a child. Wolves rarely go to the mountains, but there are arrogant ones, so you must be on your guard. Claire was not too surprised by the Lord's knowledge, because it is not for nothing that he is called a great hunter. The girl recalled the nanny's stories about the Marquis's childhood when he was a completely different person. He had sweet cheeks and was very mischievous, an ordinary boy like all the others. But it seems only Mrs. Rabilla could call him an ordinary boy. It is unlikely that anyone else can call him that. Bolt was still lying on the girl's shoulder at that moment, but he had already opened his eyes. He again seriously asked Claire if she refused to become the mistress of the castle. With such a status, she will not hold power. Maybe she shouldn't neglect this proposal. But Claire replied that she only accepted the tower and the house because he insisted. And when the Lord no longer needs her, he will simply throw her in the trash. Bolt took the flask and took a sip, and then said that despite these fears, she was still here. And judging by the rumors, she liked the job of an employee. Lately, the Marquis began to note this woman's handwriting in every work, in every document of the Mournhades. They are all full of frankness and gratitude. And everything is decorated with ornate handwriting, symbolizing the character of the employee. She is everywhere, she reminds herself everywhere, and now she behaves as if it meant nothing. Claire said that she should not be ashamed of her refusal. She still had no other choice, because she must obey any word of the master. At first, the Marquis deliberately kept his distance. He really didn't want her to become like any other person who took the name of Morn Heights, having gained not a drop of power. Although he knew she was different, he couldn't just trust because she wasn't like the others. So the Marquis kept his distance. And yet, he doesn't like the way the widow rejects him so decisively. And with a determined look. Bolt was glad that the girl was so obedient, but still, it was not worth it. He will choose a suitable family for her. You just have to choose a family you like. Is there no need to waste such talent in the position of a mistress? Claire pushed the Marquis and said she didn't want to become the mistress of any house. Moreover, there is no need to grant such a title and belong to her own family to a woman whom he only needs when he wants her, and whom she cannot refuse. Bold replied that she was right. Claire doesn't behave like a typical mistress, so she doesn't deserve all this. But the more she says, the harder it is for the Marquis to say goodbye to her. She should be smart, smile and flirt, driving the master crazy, and maybe he will put the empire at her feet. Because the Marquis can be kind and cannot resist this woman. She should use this instead of showing how displeased she is with what the Marquis gave her. And he continues to give her, then maybe things will become much more interesting. The words about an empire put at our feet interested Claire. Bolt never thought she would say something so ridiculous. What matters in this case is whether Claire can use the power she will gain if he really does this. She replied that this prerogative is clearly better than having your life depend on someone else. And she will continue to do so for the rest of the time. Claire didn't want to become famous as the Lady of the Tower, who does nothing but share her bed with her master. Val was excited by this game, especially when the girl sat on him. He explained that choosing between the life of a servant is different from bearing the name of another person that will cover hers, and living as a mistress for the rest of her days. So Claire wants at least to have freedom of choice, because without it, her life will be even more monstrous. If necessary, she will behave like a seductress, but then she will want to continue living like this. Bolt thought about it and asked her why he should meet her halfway if she behaves so arrogantly. Forgetting her place, Claire passed her hand over the Marquis's cheek and replied that he still couldn't let her go at this moment. That's why she indulges his desires and behaves arrogantly, while at the same time pointing out that she has forgotten her place. And if the Marquis continues to press, who knows, maybe the wolves will eat her or she will be found somewhere with a broken neck. Claire perfectly understood that Bolt was now very afraid of losing her, and that is where her power resided. And confidence. Then the firewood crackled in the room, and the bed creaked again. The Marquis wanted to see his seductress's face, but she hid her eyes again in shame. His intense and frank gaze weighs on Claire to this day in the past. She would have felt helpless and weak before this gaze. But now she is no longer afraid of him. Now she can look him straight in the eye. Bolt liked it when Claire looked at him. As long as he had her, he would let her do everything possible to make him desire her even more. The girl didn't understand what he was trying to achieve if he continued to behave so openly depraved. She would simply have to use him. Claire looked at him seriously and pushed him onto the pillows. The girl was sitting on top of the Marquise. He was surprised and interested in what would happen next. She took his hands off and asked him to lie down and not move. Claire was going to be the mistress he desires, so she has already taken on the role and hopes the Marquis can withstand such intensity of passions. Bolt gritted his teeth, a vein swelled on his neck, and sweat ran down his face. After this, Claire made him promise to leave her alone, but the Marquis noticed that for now she herself was coming into his hands. She approached him and said that if he wanted it that way, so be it. Yes, Claire believed it should be this way if it was an order. The next morning, the girl was already sitting in her office at work. She straightened her hair. She had a hickey on her neck from the previous night, which she had to cover with her hand when the Count entered the room. But he still noticed, and got angry because he didn't understand why she still refused the status of mistress. Then there was a conversation about a possible pregnancy, and this was beyond Claire's strength. She quickly got up and ran out, supposedly to get some ink. In the hallway, she met the Marquis, who sarcastically asked her if she was really shirking work. Claire explained that she only needed to get an ink bottle, but Bolt led her to the office. The door closed. The Marquis approached the girl, hugged her from behind and asked if she wanted to start bothering him here. But at that moment, the door was knocked on. It was Julian. He said that the informant had arrived. Bolt answered with irritation that he would decide everything later, and Claire didn't like that. She tried to persuade the Marquis to go take care of the business, because it could be something urgent. But he whispered in her ear that he only had one urgent matter here. And if she didn't understand, the Lord decided to clarify that it was Claire who had this urgent matter. She promised to give herself completely, and in return, he would not hold her in this hated castle. It was true, but Claire had given herself so much the previous night, it really wasn't enough for him. The Marquis let the girl go, went to the desk drawer, and then called her. In his hands, he held an ink bottle. It seems this amount should be enough. Bolt handed the ink to the widow, kissed her on the ear, and told her he would be in the tower before dawn. So she had better wait for him. When Claire left the office, she saw Julian and told herself that she shouldn't be ashamed. In any case, she knew what she was getting into and knew the salary and value of that status. If the Marquis gives her the opportunity to be the lady of the tower instead of the mistress, she will have to give him what he wants. And in one of the taverns, there was a lot of noise. People were commenting on the latest rumors. The Marquis brought a woman to Boulder Castle, who was also a widow and had 3 children. They also say that she decorated the tower to her taste, as luxuriously as the castle. And he also gave her this very tower. This conversation interested the blonde. He learned that the Marquis was going to marry Edwin Ringen's daughter, and this man brought a widow to the castle. The others considered him a scoundrel for his ignorance, but he excused himself by saying he had only just arrived in Geneva. People still believed that only the Archduke was interested in the wedding. The Marquis himself didn't even look at the lady, but the young blue-eyed man said that Mornhates even started a war with the pirates for Edwin's sake. But people objected again, insisting that the Marquis was simply showing the strength of his army. But Diane no longer wanted to discuss this. He was more worried about the fate of the widow. Why is the Marquis bothering with her? Since she has 3 children, she must be older. But one of the men objected. His wife works in that castle, and she said that woman was quite young. They also say she is very beautiful, especially her blue eyes. The people around started admiring the Marquis again, even his taste for women. Indian left the tavern and thought that Jenna was pregnant before he left, and that if the children were properly cared for. There should be 3. Also blue eyes, it seems they were really talking about Claire. What did she get herself into this time? At that moment, the children were lying at home with a cold. Of course, the mother rushed as fast as she could. Aunt Hilda was worried that Claire would have to be absent from work. But the girl explained that she couldn't do anything else. She also brought a doctor who touched Luca's forehead and concluded that the child had a high fever. Finn also has a fever. Most likely it's a cold. Many boys are sick now. Aunt Hilda asked Claire not to approach the children. God forbid she gets sick too, so it was better to stay away to avoid catching a cold. The doctor said Gelda was fine, but they should be careful just in case. At that moment, the nanny came with Rudia. Mrs. Rabia decided it was better for the baby to stay in the castle for now. Claire wanted to stay with the girl, but the nanny said that only those who have permission can enter the heir's castle. If they take the baby away, problems might arise. The girl really asked for Rudia to be handed over to her, when suddenly the Marquis entered the house. Noticing that the widow hadn't finished her work yet, he ordered Dylan to take her things and light the tower fireplace because they were taking the child with them. Claire seemed surprised, but Bolt acted as if these things were obvious. Because a child cannot be allowed to catch a cold. After a while, Claire was already sitting in the tower, warming herself by the fireplace and feeding Rudia. However, the food had already gotten cold and needed to be reheated. The Marquis offered to hold the child while Claire warmed the food. The widow really didn't want to hand the child over to the Lord, so she resisted and said she would do everything herself. But the child himself approached the man with the word daddy. The Marquis also noticed that even a child could decide that he was better, and Claire was completely surprised. Initially, she refused because she couldn't imagine the Marquis holding a baby. But Rudia was fine. He smiled widely at the Lord. Bolt put his finger in the child's mouth, which caused a lot of indignation from the widow. Because the finger might have been dirty. The Marquis again thought about the excessive arrogance of this woman, but today, he allowed her to behave like this. A little later, the three of them were already lying in bed. Rudia was snoring sweetly next to Claire. He asked if the girl could stay here for a while until the children got better. The Marquis said in a completely indifferent tone that, in that case, she just needed to give herself to him as before. Claire tried to say that there was a small child here, but Bolt replied that the child was too small to understand anything, or he would have to refuse the request. He whispered in her ear and even bit her, offering to move the whole family to the castle, or for her to live in the castle herself. She said the tower was enough for her, and Bolt moved closer to the girl, reminding her that it was better for her to use what he had given her. She should be content with every opportunity. There is one memory that Claire cannot let go of: the cold, the frost, when you freeze to the bone. And death seems to be knocking on the door. But the little one had to face it. Whispering voices kept asking if the girl was crazy, that she was stubborn like her mother. A vicious girl. Claire could only do what she wanted, despite all the talk. Like a friend, she felt warm and realized that she had never had such a dream before. The girl woke up crying and realized that it had been a long time since she had cried, but that she was completely alone in bed. Claire turned the whole bed in horror and then quickly ran downstairs and saw the Marquis. And Dylan. Bolt was surprised how such a small child could eat so much, and then saw Claire. She remained silent, trying to realize that all this was happening in reality. The girl couldn't understand what happened to Bolt Mornhates while he was having his 7th dream. It seemed that the child had finally had his fill. Dylan said goodbye and said he would bring the remaining things tomorrow. The knight left and Claire turned to the Marquis and asked him to take Rudia away. The Marquis said it wasn't necessary and suggested they go upstairs, and that today they would bring a new bed, since a smaller bed was needed. And Claire needs to keep her ears open. But the girl still couldn't get over the fact that Bolt ordered a bed especially for the baby. He kissed the widow's hand and said that now she wouldn't have to cuddle up to sleep with the girl. Claire still couldn't believe what was happening. It seems the world turned upside down while she was sleeping. And Rudia simply fell for this man. 3 days later, Dylan reported that Finn and Luke were much better. So tomorrow morning, he will take Rudia back home. The Marquis asked if Claire was really so upset about having to part with the baby. If she really loved the children so much. The girl said that this is her family, and she is not sure that she has always loved children. Bolt asked how Claire felt about having children, and she replied that she fought a strong fever when she was little. She lived in the cold all the time and often got sick, so it was not worth thinking about having children with her. The Marquis considered this nonsense, but Claire said in all seriousness that the doctor had warned her that it would be difficult for her to get pregnant. In other words, she will not be able to be a mother. Rudia was babbling in the Marquis's arms, pulling his hair and laughing. Bolt noticed that she had a lot of resistance, just like the captain, but now it was time to calm down. He remembered Claire's words recently. She said that he didn't seem to care, but when she told her aunt about the problems with pregnancy, she cried incessantly. The Marquis replied that with or without children, the widow still belonged to him. She was so calm, as if she had never in her life wanted to try to be a mother. As if she had never dreamed of starting her own family. Claire snuggled up again and snorted while sleeping. This angered the Marquis. Her mother was tortured by some noble brat before her death. They were tormented by hunger. That's why she is so weak. Moreover, she had to accept the condition of being a widow, raising 3 children alone who were not even hers. And she also gave herself to a man of noble blood whom she was supposed to despise. It is very annoying, and he never understood why she always sleeps in a fetal position. Then the baby in his mother's arms screamed, and the Marquis asked her to be quiet. No matter how hard he tries, Rudia, his aunt still belongs to Bolt. Outside the birds sang, the workers bustled, and two men walked on the red carpet of the hallway. Viscount Baron was in a very good mood. A week had passed since he arrived at Boldor. All because of the idiot Marquis, the Viscount failed in his mission, which was to deliver an incredibly important message from the Archduke. But today everything will be different. Now a man with military equipment, ideal for a military leader. Claire passed, Jake bowed silently to her, and the Viscount couldn't believe how it was possible. He had never seen eyes of such a pure blue shade. The Archduke definitely wouldn't be able to resist such beauty. Yes, the hair color is a bit inappropriate, but the eyes should be enough. Such a treasure is hidden in the mountains, so the Baron decided to ask the butler a question about this woman. Baron Kinitz warned the Viscount very coldly, and even a little sinisterly, that not a single soul from Volodar would dare to touch what belonged to the Marquis. Otherwise, during his life he would go through as many circles of hell as he wouldn't have to go through even if he died. The sun was setting, the Marquis was on the roof of the tower and admired the sky. All his thoughts were occupied with her. It seems Claire would like this color. Most likely, she will also soar, because she will want to be as close as possible to this sky. Bolt even smiled at how predictable she was. It was already cold. But he cannot resist looking at something as small as the sky of beautiful colors. But seeing Claire running towards him brings the Marquis great pleasure. So let him run, don't stop and run. And in a matter of minutes, the girl found herself high up in the tower. Bolt thought this was even absurd and then approached her. She has a man who is willing to lie at her feet, but she is still stubborn. And she can't even offer him a smile. But still, when the Marquis sees Claire and looks into her eyes, all disappointment drowns in these deep blue waters. Bold ran his finger over the girl's lips and gently touched them with his lips. After a while, they were already lying in the same bed. Claire shared that she didn't expect to see the Marquis today. She saw the carriages arriving from Langtau. They were much larger than the ones she saw last time. Especially the last one, so flashy and extravagant that Claire thought there might be a Lady Brody inside. Bolt kissed the girl on the crown of her head and said he didn't care at all, and Claire thought he was the only person in the world who didn't care about the Archduke's gifts. She stood up and asked if the knight wanted to become the Archduke's son-in-law. He smiled and replied that of course not. Moreover, if Count Schwieven heard this now, he would foam at the mouth. Claire looked away and said that maybe Lady Brody didn't look like her father. Of course, the widow still doesn't like her, but she was definitely elegant. And accommodating. Bolt smiled and approached Claire, remembering that blue really suited her. He leaned on the girl again, but she said she couldn't do it today. Suddenly Bolt's face changed and he froze, his gaze directed towards the door. Claire jumped up, not understanding what was happening outside, but the Marquis asked her to stay in place. And he himself took the sword. He promised the girl that if she was good, he would give her something that would suit her even better than that dress. There was a fierce battle in the street. The man in the cloak noticed that he hadn't fought in a long time, so he couldn't control his strength. Two Teutonic knights couldn't handle some stranger and got depressed. But at that moment, the Marquis came to the rescue. He immediately realized that in front of him was a mercenary using combat techniques never before seen by the Knights of the Order. Bolt was determined, drew his sword and began to fight the stranger. The Marquis saw that the mercenary was not trying to kill him, but there was enormous power hidden in the enemy's sword. Bolt tried to find out who this man was, but then a boot flew towards the attacker. Calling the hooded man a bastard, Claire furiously appeared on the battlefield. She ran towards Endian with curses, but Bolt forcibly stopped her. A few minutes ago, Claire was wondering why the Marquis took the sword he had put away earlier. And he didn't even want to look at her. She got out of bed because she just wanted to look outside out of curiosity. The girl approached the window and recognized the young man at first sight. He was as big as the Marquis and wielded a sword with an irritatingly arrogant attitude. Endian raised his hands and apologized. Volta threatened to cut off his tongue. Claire ran straight to her brother and slapped him hard, continuing to shout curses. He tried to justify himself, explaining that he was exiled because he wanted to help his beloved sister. Like a real older brother, but he received no gratitude. Claire shouted that she was also remaining in exile and couldn't even arrange a decent funeral for Jenna. But Bolt embraced the girl again. The Marquis ordered the mercenary to be imprisoned and killed if he resisted, and after a while he and Claire were sitting in the tower again. The girl sat on the Lord's lap and asked him to leave her alone, as she felt uncomfortable. He didn't want to let her go. Claire was still trembling, so he held her tighter. She explained that she was still furious. Until recently, she lived in cold and hunger, and everything was fine. Marquise said that he doesn't know what the girl went through, but he will not let it happen again as long as he is near. Bolt asked to explain why the brother and sister separated, and she explained that some time ago she worked at the pier. She was responsible for installing fishing nets, and a nobleman saw her there. When Endian saw the nobleman preparing to take Claire with him, he cut off his hand. But then it was revealed that the man was a knight from Langtau Castle. Therefore, the brother and sister had to flee, but Endian, who started the whole mess, abruptly changed the plan. He said he would go to the ship alone and explained that it would be too conspicuous if they fled together. This cowardly bastard quietly walked away while Jenna, the mother of his children, called him until her last breath. The Marquis noticed for himself that Endian did not seem cowardly to him, but still, he asked what he had to do with this man. She said indifferently that she could kill her brother, as she did not want to see his pitiful face. Moreover, she was even ready to do it herself if the Lord gave the sword to Iscaran. Bolt smiled and said he would talk about this later, but now he turned the girl on her back. She disobeyed the order, so now Claire will face punishment. And since the widow has stopped obeying her master, there is no need to expect concessions. In the dungeon, Endine was pacing on the hay, but his solitude was broken by the general of the order, who came to punish him for offending his master's honor. The young man noticed that it was this knight who attacked him with his sword in the first encounter. And now he only came to visit his sister. Julian explained that in this case, it is necessary to request an audience and not burst in with a thief's mask. After which the general twisted Endine's arm. The knight of the order reasoned that the attacker did not really aim for the head, but for the shoulder, which means he didn't want to cause harm. Analyzing the Marquis' words and Endian's behavior, Julian decided to invite the mercenary somewhere. Although he couldn't trust this man. The young man, by the way, was aware of the knight's positions, so he indicated that he knew that the general of the order was named Julian Crumb. Julian himself noticed that, despite the external similarity between brother and sister, Endian exudes a completely different aura, which can only be read by another swordsman. Some time later, the general of the order and the mercenary stood before the Marquis of Mornhates. At the time of yesterday's meeting, Endian felt something unusually noticeable in the Lord. At that moment, Bolt turned to the mercenary and asked how he knew that his sister was in the tower. Endian explained that it was a known rumor that the great Lord Margrave imprisoned a widow in his tower, and that there weren't many women with blue eyes and 3 children. And even without being completely sure that it was really his sister who was in the tower, Endian at least trusted his skills. The mercenary didn't really like this interrogation. The Marquis smiled, but his gaze penetrated straight into the soul. Now it is clear why Bolt is called the Red Lion. And even with all his skills, Endian would have suffered more yesterday if it weren't for his sister. Bolt drew his sword from its sheath and raised it near the mercenary's neck, saying that his sister had ordered him killed. A nervous laugh escaped Endian's lips. He was sure that all this was a joke, but the Marquis said that Claire even wanted to do it herself. Bolt put the sword away and said that maybe he would give him that chance, after which Endian was captured. The Lord gave orders to Crumb to tell the Teutonic Knights to watch this man. They must be patient and wait until Claire improves her sword skills enough. Julian was surprised that the Marquis was going to teach the girl himself. The general pointed out that it would be difficult for a student to train with a master who was too polite. But Bolt replied that, of course, he would not teach his woman the same way he taught men. The phrase about his woman made Endian think. He is the madman who constantly forgets his place. Claire is like the wind, like the ocean water that never stops. She has never been on his side in her life. Viscount Baron caught up with Baron Kunitz in the hallway, who, out of courtesy, asked how the guest was. It has been a long time since the day the Viscount set his eyes on Claire. And it seems the butler did everything possible to avoid running into the Baron again. The Viscount had requested an audience with the Marquis a long time ago, so he was very angry. Moreover, the Baron needs to return home before the cold arrives. The Viscount had no intention of leaving until he saw the Marquis and was determined to meet today. Kunitz tried to stop the guest, because at this moment the Marquis is with a woman. But in general, the Viscount Baron himself could notice it now, because right in the street. Long gray hair fluttered in the wind. The Baron hugged the girl, and Kunitz commented that it would be better for Viscount Baron to schedule an audience for another day. It all began when Claire arrived at the training ground by Bolt's order. The Marquis gave her a wooden sword and asked her to try wielding it. The girl confidently brandished her wooden weapon. Bolt smiled and asked if she had practiced fencing before. Claire explained that she studied with her grandfather and her brother also taught her, but only occasionally. And even if she wouldn't dare decapitate her master, the skill of wielding a sword might be useful to her in the future. Bolt was inspired and promised to train the girl properly. It started from the place where the heart is. She must aim there if the possibility exists. If you are determined to take someone's life, you must aim here, especially if your opponent has insulted him. Claire aimed, Ball praised her and then pulled her towards him. Their faces were very close to each other. The Marquis smiled. It was this scene that Viscount Baron and Baron Kunitz saw. Later, Count Schwaben sat down for a cup of tea with Claire and asked her how the lesson with the Marquis had gone. The girl replied that everything was fine, that her mood had even improved now. Claire was surprised by this question, because the Count was not happy with this sudden activity. Schwaben looked thoughtfully at his teacup and asked if the widow would like to be his adopted daughter. It seemed to Claire that they had finished talking about her as the lady of the house, and the Marquis's mistress. The Count explained that this was another matter, but the girl suggested that there were many charming ladies in the Empire who would clearly be more suitable for the role of the Count's daughter. Count Schwaben. The man said he wasn't looking for a daughter, who was nothing more than a girl, to satisfy the Marquis's needs in bed. He wants Claire to live her life and develop all her potential. At night, a blue-eyed guest visited Aunt Gelda's house. The children looked at him surprised. The aunt scolded him as usual, pushing the man home and telling him that if his body fell apart, at least he would stop getting into endless trouble. It seems even the children didn't disdain being near their father. The aunt had already started listing the swear words again when suddenly Claire stopped her. Who had returned, because children at that age absorb all words. Now the girl asked her brother why he had come here. The man replied that the old man made him promise to bring Claire back. The grandfather gets older every day, and that's why he worries about his granddaughter. Endian and the pirates were sent to Puisin because the old man had become too impatient. And they caused no serious harm. The man started swearing that his sister got into trouble and became the Marquis's woman. But Aunt Gelda quickly defended her niece. Claire began to calm her aunt, reminding her that without his help, she would have immediately died there. On the island, Ending decided to clarify whether the girl really came here, not of her own free will, but because the Marquis's bastard forced her to go with him. She protested, saying that everything was wrong, but her brother approached Claire and called her with him. In the street, Enden swore that a woman could not decide and achieve anything. He gave money and simply asked to wait until winter passed. But Claire explained that this was not enough to save the children. The brother was indignant because in this case, she decided to go straight into the arms of the scoundrel. He grabbed his sister's hand and shouted why she cared about his children, why she fed them, and protected because she had always been so cold to him. Claire didn't like this tone. She burst out and remembered that she didn't need Endian as a man. He should only be her brother and nothing more, and the girl doesn't want to repeat this twice. If she doesn't like something, he can leave if he did it once. The second time will be even easier. Moreover, Claire believes that one of the reasons Endian ran away was because Jenna was obsessed with him. But her brother replied that he was trying to love and protect her. Claire turned away and seriously said that they both knew the truth. He only accepted Jenna's love while his sister rejected him. Endian was horrified and asked why his sister kept taking care of his children. He could ignore them, she should have run away, because how much of a burden would a girl have to be for her to stop being so cruel? Endian still tried to say that he would take the girl away from here, but she turned around and replied that she just needed to be near her aunt and help her. Claire kept wondering why she didn't run away, and also did everything possible with her own hands to look so stupid. Does Diane believe she had another choice? He believes he has the right to take care of her. Moreover, he also thinks that she won't be able to do anything being a woman. What nonsense! If Diane continues to resist or interfere, Claire will kill him, and if he returns, it will be of his own free will. The Count's words about self-realization and potential spun in my head. He then offered to take a higher position so that Claire wouldn't need anyone's help. It all began when, under the skies connecting the beginning and the end, two people obsessed with love promised to stay together forever. They were truly a wonderful couple and shouldn't have separated even on their deathbed. The Marquis of Mornhates 2 generations ago, Newburgh Mornhates, also known as Bolt's grandfather. He asked if this was a wonderful story. Baby Bolt himself sat with a bored expression and decided to clarify whether there would really be a history lesson today. The grandfather showed the boy a book and told him that this was also very important for the princess, who would soon arrive in Geneva. Newburgh expected this marriage of convenience, even though the lady was still too young to ascend the throne. However, she is a little older, but the next sentence from Mornhate Sr. was interrupted by a knock on the door. The current Marquis entered. Martel Mornhates, Bolt's father, wanted to ask his father to step out for a moment. Bolt realized he needed to leave the room, so he said goodbye. But out of the corner of his ear, he heard his father talking about a maid whose whereabouts were unknown. The boy thought about the princess, whose parents died after her birth. His grandfather was obliged to protect her. He lived his life keeping the memory of Emperor Ringen. Before Ringen died, leaving only the Empress, Berta, and her newborn daughter. He left a request. The Emperor asked his old friend to defend the princess in the name of the Mornhides. That's why Bolt often thought about the princess, although he hadn't even seen her portrait. An unfortunate princess who was orphaned immediately after birth. They say she has the same red hair as the Empress and the brightest blue eyes in the entire palace. But Bolt didn't want to insist on it because it was just a marriage of convenience. There were many things beyond his comprehension, like the concern of a conquering man solely for his daughter, or the value of a princess, even though she was actually useless. When the boy turned 13, an assassin entered the heir's tower on the day his engagement to the princess was officially announced. The father was furious. If Bolt was going to kill the attacker from the start, then why was he so cruel? The boy replied that he wondered how much pain it would take to extract the truth from someone who is paid to kill. The emperor's attempts to avoid various problems in the future led to the fact that all failures began to correlate with Esbjergen's work, who held a grudge against the empire. And the following year, Princess Scadia drowned in the Jurassic Sea. No one started helping her because she had already gone too deep into the dark abyss. It seems Emperor Ringen's wish never came true. No one in the castle said these words out loud, but everyone had the same thoughts in mind. If Bolt Mornhates had died, the princess might have survived. One can imagine the expression on his father's face that day. An adult Marquis walked along the wall, bleeding. The Count ran after him, begging him to stop because he couldn't move. The wound was very serious. Bolt needed to remain silent. But he entered Claire's office, where she was receiving nobles and documents. She was surprised to see the bloody body and dismissed the people for today. The Marquis is still the owner of Geneva, so he can do whatever he wants. The nobles left the office whispering. Claire and Bolt looked at each other, moved by today's words. He approached the girl, reminding her that she shouldn't hesitate to kill her prey. Claire smiled and replied that she wouldn't chase an animal that wouldn't escape anyway. Bolt raised his tone and reminded her that the widow was always his only one. From the beginning, she belonged to Boltmoor Heights. Claire asked him not to move abruptly because he could die. This really astonished the Marquis. Why did she even care about his life if tomorrow she could stop belonging to him? He didn't want to lose Claire, he didn't even want to die. So rustling and moaning could be heard among the bloody papers. The girl was trembling. She was so weak that she couldn't even push the lord away. She was so fragile that it would be easy to twist her thin neck. In the first place, Bolt thought about killing her. Before this woman destroyed him, he only thought about how to become her first and last man. But now he seems to have realized one important thing. Bolt decided that he would rather die than pluck a single hair from this arrogant woman. He was dying in her arms, promising to become her nightmare. Claire remembered that Ending was always a brave boy. He didn't even know how old he was or where his parents were. He went sailing until an old man picked him up. The old man turned out to be a pirate captain, and he didn't realize that the boy had already grown up. He was talented and developing rapidly. It was predicted that he would become a future captain. When he was 10 years old, he had nothing to fear except a small girl. The boy was indignant how such a small mouse could speak to him like that. Claire said that you can only succeed if you watch your language. It wasn't worth mentioning that Aunt Helda lost her lover due to her bad temper. Therefore, the brother and sister were not related to Sanguine, and Enden got into trouble again. Julian found the man in the hallway and hurried to take him to the room. At that moment, Claire was snoring in the tower on the Marquis's shoulder. There wasn't a trace of worry on her face. She pressed against Bolt to keep warm. The Marquis still thought that Claire and Ending were not related, but since he didn't ask, there was no lie in it. Who would have guessed who this ordinary woman would be tricking like this? If she is so obsessed with these children who aren't even her mother's, then another reason could be another connection. Bolt got out of bed and walked decisively towards the exit. Dylan stood at the door and asked if the knight would stay here overnight. The lord ordered that this woman's aunt be imprisoned. After a while, Hilda found herself behind bars, trying to find out the reason for her imprisonment. She couldn't understand what could have happened so suddenly, apart from the machinations of that damned boy. The Marquis entered. Goosebumps ran down the body of the woman who had done Indiana. Hilda bowed at the master's feet and asked why he wanted to see her. Bolt brought her here so the woman could answer a question for him. The Marquis was interested in why they pretended to be family if they were not related by blood. But Hilda replied that Claire was the daughter of a woman who was her sister. Bolt said in a calm tone, while the woman babbled that he hated foolish people. And Yelda said that she was a close friend of Claire's mother, and that her father took her in when she lost her parents at an early age. So they grew up like sisters, and Claire's mother was the most beautiful woman in the world. She was also Yelda's closest friend. They spent every second together. Even when she promised to give herself to a man, her aunt stood by her side and wished her happiness. But at that moment, the redhead invited Hilda to move in with her. It seemed that her father would be more comfortable this way, because he took care of them equally. After Claire's mother died, the bastards imprisoned the girl. They locked her in that place, without being able to even light a fire that cold winter. Bolt asked what kind of relationship they had with this gray-haired man. Endian is a boy who was taken in by Hilda's father, and his own aunt had to leave home to find a doctor. Since Claire was seriously ill, they could have easily died while crossing the storm if it weren't for Endian. Claire was responsible for 3 children and a brother sitting on her neck, so she was also seriously ill. The Marquis is still not entirely convinced of his hypothesis about the unusual relationship between brother and sister, so he decided to ask one more question. Bolt wondered if Claire really couldn't have children. Gelda said that the girl was indeed diagnosed with infertility. This was due to medications, intended to naturally raise her low body temperature. Upon leaving, Bolt said he would send Greg to Gelda, who needed to describe everything to her in detail. The aunt was left alone in the hay behind bars. Surprised that this was the end of the conversation, Bolt ordered EE to see Greg at dawn and order him to look for medicines for low body temperature. The next day, a group of people with boxes crowded near the tower. Claire understood nothing, but Jake explained that all these were gifts for her from the Marquis. The girl thought that since Geneva was more of a fortified fortress, such extravagant things must have been brought from Langthew. Kinnitz explained that the Archduke's gifts were stored in a warehouse, and if any of the Teutonic Knights had noticed them, it would have caused a scandal. All because the Teutons held a grudge against the Archduke because of the previous commander. The conversation between Claire and Jake was interrupted by the appearance of Marquis Mornhates. He immediately asked if his orders had arrived. Jake said they had just finished checking them. However, there is a lot to do, so it will take some time, so the Marquis suggested Claire go for a walk. The two rode horses across the snowy plains. Claire was tense. She had no idea how difficult it was to ride a horse, and besides, the horse was moving very fast. Bolt held the girl by the waist and told her to keep her back straight. She needed to look arrogant, as Bouquet liked such riders. Claire doubted the animal's ability to recognize such things, and it immediately neighed. The lady had to apologize. The Marquis lifted the girl's chin and told her that she should also look around. He doesn't want to admire the views. Majestic mountains really rose before them, but the beautiful view was spoiled by the thought of interrogating Aunt Helda. The Marquis spoke of people crossing the mountains in winter so as not to form a large circle. Otherwise, they would have to remain trapped in the winter forest and be devoured by wild animals. Claire asked the Lord if he himself was lost in that forest. Ball replied in a languid voice that this was the case, and moreover, maybe he was lost now. The Marquis moved as close to Claire as possible and kissed her deeply. It never stops snowing here, so the decision was made to return home before they got trapped in snowdrifts. Bolt slowed down his horse. Claire closed her eyes in fear, but Bolt convincingly asked her not to squint them. The girl opened her eyes and saw incredibly beautiful snowy mountains. It was a real highland. Claire felt as if everything had swallowed her, but she wasn't afraid, because wherever she was, she felt his presence. And warmth. After a while, they were already taking a warm bath. Bolt became interested in what she was talking about with Jake. Claire decided to ask about the grievance of the Teutonic Knights. The Marquis explained that it was the Archduke who killed the previous commander of the Teutonic Knights. Of course, the imperial family denies it. But who will believe them? And all because the Teutons did not recognize the legitimacy of the current imperial family. Since the emperor appointed his mother as empress, the Teutons refused to worship them. So the emperor showed what could happen in case of disobedience. What nonsense! Power and strength are something that must be earned, not served on a silver platter. They greatly craved the adoration of the people, but all their attempts amounted to the death of their reputation. Claire thought that the Teutons were unquestionably loyal to the imperial family. But in reality, they were loyal to anyone who could defeat their captain. The first emperor, Ringen, emerged victorious, so the Teutons undoubtedly became part of the imperial knights. Bolt was surprised by the woman's obedience, and now he also realized that she corresponded to the Teutonic warrior spirit and demanding nature. And the Teutons would only be loyal to the direct heirs of the imperial family. So if they disobeyed the ruler, it meant he was illegitimate. Their refusal hurt the pride of the imperial family, so the commander of the order was murdered. And this conversation had already lasted longer than Bolt expected, but Claire did not give up. And she asked what would happen to the Teutons if a direct heir to the ruling family now appeared. Bolt, tired of the questions, said it was already time to pay for today's lesson. Moans were heard in the room. Active movements splashed the water in the bathtub. But the Marquis refused to stop. He was going to take Claire again and again. She would always be his. The girl felt like she would immediately melt from this heat. Her whole body trembled. Bolt hugged Claire and whispered to her that she was his woman. But the girl refused to live like this. She was only going to laugh at the Marquis, but for some reason she felt like her heart was breaking. To distract herself from strange thoughts, Claire passionately kissed Bolt. The next day, the girl faced a large amount of accumulated work. The Count brought more papers, as during the 2 days of the clerk's absence. No one was working on these documents. Claire was indignant because she was absent against her will. She couldn't even sleep. But Schweven didn't care. The girl decided to take the opportunity and ask about the Teutons. What would happen to the Marquis if a direct heir to the ruling family now appeared? Claire's curiosity bordered on impudence, but Schweven replied that despite the Marquis's victory over Crome, his priority would always be the imperial family. The girl now understood why the commander was now so loyal to Bolt, all because of his victory in battle. Claire did not give up and decided to find out what benefit the Mournhades gained from the Teutons' support. The Count explained that the warriors of Geneva would not have been able to resist the Teutons in battle. At that moment, Julian Crum entered the office asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. He came to say that the Marquis was calling Claire. The Count had already begun to be indignant, but the knight said that the Lord was calling both of them. Schweven was surprised, but apparently this is related to the return of his son. All three arrived at the Marquis's office, where Bolt and Max, who had returned from an important mission, were already waiting. Claire placed herself behind the table with the documents, and Max tried to snatch at least a word of thanks from his father. Handing him a scroll of parchment, blood on paper enraged the Count with such a disrespectful attitude towards the document. So he immediately asked Claire to document it. But above all, Claire was amazed by the Marquis and could not believe that he was satisfying all requests immediately after the Count's request. Bolt sat silently and watched the girl work while father and son argued. Schwaben said that this contract is very important, so it needs a copy. So Claire should focus on the conversation. The Lord asked Max how the captain's negotiations went. He even had to use his fists. Claire took note of everything Max said, although she doubted whether it was appropriate for her to do this job. Bold mentioned that there is a secret place that the imperial family does not know about, a mine, that the Marquis hides in every possible way for a long time from prying eyes. Claire, feeling that it was just a passing stage, did not understand why she should have this information. Bolt at that moment was deciding who could be sent as the new delegation. The Count spoke out against the choice of knights, because they do not have enough experience in naval warfare. And Max was annoyed because this is the only order that stops 10 pirate ships on one ship. This dispute reached a dead end, so the Marquis took care of choosing the man who was willing to send. The Marquis addressed Julian with a question about the same, and it seems the captain guessed that he meant that woman's brother. In a cold tone, Bolt ordered that he be sent to the training hall to see what Endian could do. Many people gathered to witness the combat with the Marquis. They had absolutely no faith in the sailor's abilities. Bolt, in his armor, walked calmly through the castle hallway. Claire called him, reminding him that Endian, her brother, was just a sailor and could not face the Marquis in a fair fight. This did not bother the Lord at all. He wanted to see everything in practice, but the girl insisted that sending her brother to Blanche also made no sense. The Marquis couldn't resist. He turned to the widow and asked if she really thought he would allow this bastard to stay by her side. Claire assumed that Bolt was worried about the nature of her relationship with Endian. He was really so obsessed. The Marquis stroked the girl's cheek and asked her to behave well. Otherwise, he would decapitate her brother. Claire should also wait for Bolt to receive a gift intended only for her. Endian was already waiting for the Marquis in the street, who considered the Lord nothing more than a narrow-minded idiot. He believed that all nobles, even margraves, are the same. No man would allow someone else to rub against his lady. Bolt was fully armed. He drew his legendary sword, shining in the sun. Claire, standing among the crowd, lowered her beautiful blue eyes. Endian's blood boiled when he thought about how his sister spent her nights with the Marquis. The crowd shouted. They had absolutely no faith in the sailor's abilities. The man frowned and rushed into battle. A fierce battle was raging in the arena, and the metallic noise could be heard in the air. Indian expected to break all of Bolt's limbs, from the head resting on his shoulder to the fingers touching his body. He was going to break the marquise with everything that touched Claire. She was always a cold girl whom he himself didn't dare approach. Meanwhile, the crowd noticed Indian's attacks and gentle movements. But still, Bolt professionally blocked all attacks and moved very well, as if he were playing with his opponent. However, suddenly the smile left the marquis's face. He suddenly rushed towards Indian. And his movements changed. The gray-haired man decided to provoke his opponent and said that he actually stole the first kiss from Claire. This fight ended with Indian's defeat. Meanwhile, Max told Julian that he saw no similarity between brother and sister. He also noticed that the Marquis was exhausting his opponent a lot. Most likely, the knight wasn't himself at that moment. It got dark outside. Bolt walked, sweating, and wondered if he should have killed that man. On the other hand, he cannot believe that he became enraged at such a provocation. He really wanted to decapitate the scoundrel, open his stomach, so as not to feel so bad. Jake met the knight and asked him a million questions, but the Marquis was only worried about Claire's whereabouts. Keenitz reported that most likely she was with the Count, and Bolt gave the order to bring the girl to him and to get rid of that man. The Marquis only thought that this woman would belong to him forever. She will always wear his favorite color, look as he wishes, and live where he wants. Under the cover of darkness, Claire stood near the study door and thought that the Marquis had visited her in the tower last night. But this was the first time she had been called this way. She was interested in what happened to Indian. She couldn't see it through to the end. But she heard that the Marquis won. The door creaked. Bolt went out into the hallway and announced that Claire's brother was going to see Blanche. The girl reacted calmly, and the Marquis was surprised that earlier she had resisted, argued, and now her strategy had changed. She mustered the courage and asked if the reason this woman had unconditional love for her children was because they were the children of the man she was in love with. It is possible that Claire perceives them as her own in the hope that one day he will return to her. Not even ice water and cold wind could cool Bolt's burning heart. There is no doubt that she belongs to him. She is very obedient, but the Marquis cannot take even a piece of her. Claire fell silent, and Bolt was ready to pounce on her and break her thin neck. But suddenly, she said that Indian saved her life. The girl felt the coldness emanating from the Marquis for some time now. She vaguely noticed how much this man cared about her. But today, she began to realize that he cared about her more than she could have imagined. Claire explained that Indian saved her twice from drowning in the Jurassic Sea, so she was simply repaying the debt. But if there were no obstacles, she would have strangled him with her own hands. This bastard ruined her life. Claire didn't understand what she was feeling at that moment. She didn't know whether she wanted to die, or continue living, or run away from everyone and everywhere. Bolt placed his hand on the girl's fragile shoulder and then placed a beautiful jewel around her neck. Many precious stones shone even in the darkness. He hugged her from behind and told her that she wouldn't dare even look at her parents without his permission. The Marquis moved closer to Claire's face and told her that she must remain close to him. In Bolt's room, a wooden bed creaked, and conversations about blue eyes immersed the girl in memories of how everyone who saw her pronounced these words. She wondered if blue eyes really had some kind of magical power. Bolt made a sudden move. He hoped that Claire wasn't thinking about something else at that moment. She looked at this man and realized that there was something in common between him and that idiot. Childish arrogance and a sense of responsibility towards her have become an obsession. But he doesn't realize it because he is gradually losing himself. He had tried many times to get rid of his obsession, to fall in love with someone else. But in the end, this bastard would send them all to hell. Even Marquis Baltimore in hides, the strongest man in the Empire still, because of his own stupidity, leads to self-destruction. However, it seems he has become different now. The Lion of the Empire kisses her with such reverence. He is very kind to her, and this greatly frightens Claire. In a fit of passion, the heated Bold whispered that he would do anything for her. Unlike the widow, who has nothing behind her, the Marquis is so obsessed with the need to protect her. And yet, he behaves like this without hesitating for a second. Moreover, he doesn't even know what Claire really wants. Embarrassed, she asked to take her away so she couldn't think of anything else. Bolt smiled and began to fulfill the girl's request. New scratches appeared on her back, and the room filled with loud moans. The Marquis kissed the girl on the forehead, hugged her tightly, and told her that he wanted her to desire only him. And then he would throw the world at her feet, and not just jewelry and trinkets. At Lanto Castle, they talked about the Marquis's mistress, a widow with 3 children. The Viscount told the Archduke that this woman looked beautiful, like a young maiden. More importantly, the Marquis seems to have a serious relationship with her. She visits the castle often, so we can assume that she is quite an influential figure there. It is especially interesting how the servants treat the girl. Baron Kunitz's special attitude suggests that this widow is an important guest. The Viscount insisted that since this woman had already given birth to 3 children, it would also be easy for her to give birth to another one for the Marquise. At this rate, she might get ahead of the Archduke, but Edwin didn't like being nervous about some insignificant mistress. After all, she was just a commoner, but the Viscount was worried that the Marquis had absolutely no plans to marry Lady Brodie. At the last meeting, the Lord said that he didn't think he would visit Puisin again. Moreover, beyond the high mountains lives the Svergen Marquis Missent, who has only one daughter. Svergen would gladly give up his only princess. If their relationship with the Marquis of Mornhates is at stake, they would be delighted to give him anything to join forces. Now anyone in the Empire, upon hearing about the House of Mornhates, will think of Bolt Mornhates. He started with the rank of a brave warrior and member of the Margrave's Assembly. But now he is considered a brilliant marquis who condemned his predecessors to oblivion and, moreover, he is known as a hero who defended the Empire. The Archduke was furious. He could not allow that bastard to ruin the purity of his blood. Ruler Martin Xavier accumulated so much wealth because it came from the side of Edwin's mother's family. The Archduke believes that it was the right decision to get rid of this family. But they were still the ideal scapegoats responsible for the dirty work. Edwin thought about how his blood relatives could be useful. From now on, it becomes difficult to think about the future. Here the Archduke drew the attention of Viscount Baron, who was still sitting in the office. Edwin shouted at the guest and ordered him to go find out what Bolt's bastard was doing, and to do everything possible to marry him to Lady Brodie. It was necessary to organize a wedding at all costs, because if he brought Bolt and Brodie together, and they gave a son to the world, that would solve everything. The Archduke's hysterical laughter was heard in the study as he vividly imagined his dream. Claire was diligently working on the papers at that moment, tracing every letter with a pen. The Count reported that the delegation would leave for Blanche today, and was interested to know if the girl would go to say goodbye. Schwiven noted that this trip was quite dangerous. Perhaps it was worth blessing her brother before departure. Claire replied indifferently, but she realized that the Count was surprisingly sentimental. She explained that she was initially against this plan, but the Marquis dispelled all her doubts and, moreover, Endine himself decided everything during the last month that he constantly visited the house. He acted so out of place, and it wasn't just that Endine himself had changed. He took on the role of a father more often, and his family story spread throughout the castle. Some were imbued with sympathy, and others were angry. One by one, people started opening up to Claire and began treating her differently. Lady Claire began to address her more often, but there was also one person who did not change. The Count noted the girl's composure towards her own family, but this made him happy, because she would devote more time to work. Schweven said goodbye and left the office. The girl was glad she could finally sit in silence. She thought the children would get bored after Endian left, so she should visit them. However, a few steps distracted her from these thoughts. At that moment, the Marquis entered the office. He took the girl's hand and led her, despite the fact that she still had a lot of work to do. Bolt led Claire outside, where the horse was already waiting for them. The Marquis also threw a fur coat over the girl's shoulders and told her she had to hurry because she needed to return before nightfall. Claire was surprised if she was going out again. Bolt smiled and said that this time everything would be a little different. He promised that this time he would allow the girl to do whatever she wanted with him. They ended up going skiing. Claire was constantly falling, and Bolt reminded her to keep her feet together and to fall on her side when slowing down. At this speed, she wouldn't be able to keep up with the Marquis, but it seemed Claire didn't understand why she would need this. She remembered the expression on his face that night. It seemed that he was reliving the heaviness he did not share. Claire timidly noted that Latin was much easier than walking in snowshoes. Bolt convinced the girl that there was no need to be afraid of steep slopes, that such insignificant things did not deserve attention. He promised that he would catch her every time she slipped or fell. Claire is already so used to these big, warm palms that even while sleeping she seeks his embrace. But she shouldn't get used to it, because he wants to see her as the poor Claire who suffers from past failures. But if she rejects that life, I am sure the Marquis will become her enemy. The girl stood in front of the slope and convinced herself that she was not afraid of heights. Shouting, she rushed down, lost her balance, but was caught by the Marquis as promised. When he smiles like that, he looks like an ordinary man. Anyone else, without hundreds of titles, would shine as much as he does now. The girl's restless heart beats so fast that she slips and falls upon seeing the Lord. And the warmth enveloping her body is able to melt the snow. They lay down in the snow, kissed, and smiled at each other. The warmest winter Claire has experienced is now, and spring is approaching. But still, despite the Marquis's initial words, she doubted that one day he would leave this place. Later, the Count and Claire were sitting working. The delegation had already arrived in Blanche. They condemned the mines, but Max was clearly more concerned about the fact that the Duke of Weimar was ordering a new portrait for his daughter. Apparently a marriage proposal. The captain remained indignant and argued with his father, so the Marquis was forced to silence him. Everyone in Geneva knows how much Bolt values his wife, but Max didn't know how Claire herself would feel about it. At that moment, someone knocked on the office, and Baron Kinitz entered with a message from Puisin. The Marquis assumed that the Archduke would not sit idly by. Max was sure that they had already heard about the delegation. Bolt began reading the message. The captain of the order was eager to know what it was about. It turned out that the Archduke had sent someone instead of calling the Marquis. Claire seemed bored at that moment. She always gets cold when these kinds of conversations start. The Archduke's envoy will be the new guard captain replacing Xavier. The Count was horrified, Max too, and Claire was surprised that father and son arrived at the same time. At that moment, the Marquis stood up and slapped the table with the palm of his hand. He said he would receive this man and ordered Baron Kinitz to prepare for the guest's arrival. Next month, Lady Brodie will most likely visit Boldor with the Knights of Puisin. Therefore, everyone must be prepared to greet her with the utmost respect.